Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Lisa Valdez. Lisa Valdez was born on September 6, 1961, in San Francisco, California. She has an older brother, and a loving mother. Although her father was absent from their lives, but Lisa and her mother shared an exceptionally close bond, rarely arguing. Those who knew them admired the harmony in their relationship. During her teenage years, Lisa developed a passion for dancing. She also became interested in IT, which was a relatively new field at the time. Notably, she was an early user of email, using it before many of her friends knew of its existence. This interest significantly influenced her future career path. Following college, Lisa got a job as a software analyst in San Francisco. Her mother later used her savings to purchase a small studio apartment for Lisa in a prestigious neighborhood, which offered a stunning city view. Living alone, Lisa advanced in her career, prioritized family time, and continued dancing, attending weekly practice sessions with her best friend. On May 16, 1998, Lisa, who was 36 at the time, hosted an evening gathering with her mother and some family friends. After the guests departed, her mother helped with the dishes and then headed home. Before leaving, Lisa promised to call her mother the next day, but the call never came. Initially, Lisa's mother thought she was simply busy, especially since she had dance practice scheduled for that day. However, as the day progressed without any communication from Lisa, her mother began to worry. The following day, Lisa's mother tried calling her, but there was no answer. She continued attempting to reach Lisa, but her calls went unanswered. On Monday, the fourth day since they last spoke, Lisa's colleagues contacted her mother to express their concern that Lisa had not shown up for work and was not responding to their calls. This was highly unusual, as Lisa was known for her reliability and always notified her workplace if she needed to take a day off. Lisa's mother grew increasingly concerned, so she decided to visit apartment complex to check on her. When she arrived, she witnessed a disturbing scene. The building was surrounded by police tape and there were a lot of police officers. She asked the police what was going on, and they told her that earlier that day, some residents had reported a strange smell coming from one of the apartments. The building manager checked and found an unlocked door, then went inside and found a body on the floor, and they called the police. The police then were promptly called to the scene. Police officers quickly identified the victim as Lisa. Her body showed clear signs of trauma and decomposition, indicating she had been murdered several days prior. The presence of blood stains on the floor and bed, along with her partially undressed state and underwear found next to her body, suggested she had been being attacked and sexually abused. The room was in disarray, but further investigation revealed that this was typical of Lisa's living habits. The TV was on, and the air conditioner was set to 78 degrees. No signs of robbery were present, with valuables and jewelry left untouched. However, Lisa's keys and a gym bag were missing. A peculiar detail was the removal of some of Lisa's hair by the attacker, hinting at strong personal motives. The numerous injuries on her body further supported this theory. The detectives suspected that the killer might have had a prior relationship with Lisa and cherish a deep-seated hatred for her, given the lack of forced entry and the secure nature of the fenced apartment complex. Additionally, the apartment complex was secured with a fence, and access required either a key or to be let in by a resident. The police began interviewing residents in the apartment building, searching for someone who might have seen the attacker. They quickly found a lead when one of Lisa's neighbors reported that 2 days earlier, upon returning from vacation, he noticed damage to the metal frame of his front door and a faint blood stain. Although he had informed the manager, but they decided not to report it to the police, as it appeared his apartment had not been broken into. Detectives believed the same person who killed Lisa was responsible for the damage to the neighbor's door. However, the motives behind these actions were unclear. One theory was that the killer tried to break into the neighbor's apartment, was caught by Lisa, and subsequently murdered her. Another theory suggested the attempted break-in might have occurred after Lisa's murder, which seemed unusual. Detectives speak with the housekeeper who cleaned Lisa's apartment weekly. 2 days before Lisa's body was found, the housekeeper attempted to enter the apartment, but found the door blocked from the inside. Through a crack in the door, she saw a partially undressed woman on the floor and heard a man's voice. Believing she was interrupting a private moment, she left immediately. Police suspected that Lisa was already dead at this time and the man's voice belonged to her killer, who was still inside the apartment. The housekeeper mentioned a suspicious detail, a black bag with a zipper near the body. However, she was uncertain since she only caught a glimpse. On the inside of Lisa's apartment door, an envelope with cash was taped, untouched. This money was intended for the housekeeper, a frequent habit of Lisa. The fact that the envelope was still there suggests that Lisa was likely attacked after her mother departed, sometime between midnight and the early hours of the morning, which would have been when Lisa normally left the payment. Neighbors from the floor below corroborated these things. They reported hearing thuds and someone descending the stairs, although they didn't see the individual. As detectives searched Lisa's apartment, they discovered an unusual detail: the toilet seat was up, uncommon for a woman living alone. Forensic experts found a partial fingerprint that didn't match Lisa's. The police collected fingerprints from Lisa's acquaintances and relatives who may have visited her apartment, but none matched. This led detectives to believe that the fingerprint might belong to the killer. The medical experts completed their report, revealing new information about Lisa's case. Her body had over 20 stab wounds, but due to decomposition, it was unclear if she had been sexually assaulted. However, defensive wounds on her body suggested that Lisa had attempted to fight off her attacker. Furthermore, skin particles were found under her nails, which were likely from the killer, and were sent to the lab for analysis. In the meantime, forensic experts analyzed evidence from the apartment and discovered a crucial clue: a pillowcase with multiple blood stains. Upon closer examination, it was determined that not all of the blood on the pillowcase belonged to Lisa, as some of the stains were from a different source. As a result, the pillowcase was sent to the lab for further testing. Investigators suggested that the killer may have unintentionally hurt himself while stabbing Lisa, which can happen when using a knife. Supporting this hypothesis was the discovery of 2 bandages from a first aid kit inside the toilet. The killer might have used these to stop his bleeding and potentially left fingerprints on the toilet seat when disposing of the bandages. DNA analysis revealed that the blood on the pillowcase came from an unknown male not listed in the FBI database. This man's DNA also matched skin particles under Lisa's nails and a blood stain on her pillowcase. Despite no matches in the DNA database, detectives obtained the killer's DNA profile. They then compared it to DNA samples from suspects in their system who had committed crimes in Lisa's area and closely examined her acquaintances. Lisa's mother shared information about Lisa's relationship with a man named Albert Ketto, stating they had plans for a date the day following the murder. However, these plans were canceled by Albert a few days beforehand. When detectives questioned Ketto, they noticed a large cut on his hand, which made them suspect him as the killer. And he might have injured themselves while stabbing Lisa. Despite this, Albert denied any involvement in the murder. The detectives took his fingerprints and DNA samples for comparison, but surprisingly, they did not match the blood on the pillowcase or the skin particles found under Lisa's nails. Investigators continued their search for other suspects by reviewing the messages on Lisa's answering machine from the days leading up to the murder. After making a list of 40 people texting Lisa, they found one message particularly suspicious. Just hours before the murder, while Lisa still had guests at her home, a man called her, but she didn't pick up, he leaving a strange message: "You know how it goes, Tita. Hey Lisa, Are you home? When police played this message for one of Lisa's friends, the friend immediately identified the voice as Albert Robinson, a work colleague of Lisa's. Albert had made his feelings for Lisa known, but she had rejected his advances. Despite this, they remained friendly at work and, with Lisa considering him a friend. During the memorial service for Lisa, something else happened. Albert attended the service and delivered a speech that left everyone perplexed. He asserted that he and Lisa were intensely in love and had plans to get married and start a family. However, Lisa's friends and mother disputed Albert's things, stating that they were entirely false. According to them, Lisa had mentioned that Albert had expressed interest in her, but she did not reciprocate his feelings. Lisa's mother also emphasized that Lisa would have confided in her about such significant plans. Albert was questioned by the police and he denied being involved in Lisa's murder. He claimed to love her and said he would never hurt her. However, he refused to give the police his DNA sample and fingerprints, which raised suspicions. As a result, detectives continued to investigate him and look for new evidence. It is possible that Lisa's failure to reciprocate Albert's feelings made him hate her and kill her in revenge. The violent nature of the murder suggested that it was personal, and the fact that the killer cut off some of Lisa's hair and took it with him could be related to Albert's fixation on her. Detectives got a search warrant for Albert's house and found it filled with dozens of Lisa's photos, further evidence of his obsession. Despite this, he continued to deny any involvement in the murder. He voluntarily provided his fingerprints and DNA, which were sent to the lab for analysis. However, the lab results showed no match with the DNA and fingerprints found at the crime scene. As a result, he was cleared as a suspect, and the investigation continued. Years went by with no new leads, and the case remained unsolved. Investigators regularly checked DNA and fingerprint databases, hoping the killer would be caught for another crime, but there were no matches. Police were initially baffled that the perpetrator of such a heinous crime did not appear in any databases, so they doubted it was his first serious offense. Despite ongoing searches over the years, the police couldn't find any matches. Lisa's mother made multiple television appearances, pleading for anyone with information to come forward, yet detectives remained without new leads. In 2010, detectives discovered the FBI had begun utilizing a new DNA technology to identify suspects by comparing their DNA samples with those in the database to find relatives. This method, unlike genetic genealogy which emerged later, was only effective for locating close relatives, such as a father or brother. With no other leads, police requested a comparison in 2011 and waited. On September 2nd, lead detective Ive received a call from the FBI. They said that when the experts retested the DNA sample, they got a perfect match. The DNA from blood and skin particles under her nails matched a 52-year-old man named Anthony Hughes, who had recently been added to the FBI database. Anthony had a lengthy criminal record that went back decades, but previously, his crimes didn't qualify for his DNA to be included in the FBI database. However, due to updates in legislation, it became mandatory for individuals convicted of crimes in California to provide DNA samples, irrespective of how minor the offense was. Anthony's DNA sample was added to the database following his arrest for a minor shoplifting offense. In addition to his DNA, his fingerprints were also entered into the database, and they were found to match a fingerprint discovered on Lisa's toilet seat. Specialists were even able to pinpoint which specific finger left the print with relative ease. Before arresting Anthony, detectives searched for more evidence linking him to the crime. They stumbled upon a new clue. 13 years prior, police had reviewed messages left on Lisa's answering machine, but only those received before her murder. Now, after all these years, detectives found that Anthony had left a message for Lisa just a day after her death. The message itself was unremarkable and didn't raise suspicions. However, if the police had investigated Anthony at that time, they won't just find out his dense criminal history but also another important piece of information. Upon reviewing Lisa's belongings, detectives discovered Anthony's phone number in her address book, which confirmed that Lisa and Anthony knew each other. Further investigation, including conversations with Lisa's friends, revealed that Lisa and Anthony had dated briefly in high school. With this new information, detectives felt they had sufficient grounds to question Anthony. However, since he didn't have a fixed address at the time, they decided to approach him cautiously to prevent him from fleeing. When they arrested him, they initially told him that he was being investigated in connection with a series of robberies in San Francisco. Anthony surrendered without resistance. During the interrogation, detectives initially asked Anthony about the robberies. They then inquired about his relationship with Lisa. Initially, Anthony denied knowing Lisa, but when shown her photo, he acknowledged that they had known each other in high school. He also claimed that he hadn't seen her since the late 1980s. Detectives spent several hours questioning Anthony about his relationship with Lisa and whether he had seen her recently. When investigators confronted Anthony about the DNA evidence found in Lisa's apartment from 1998, his response was unexpected. He burst into tears and requested a pen and paper, seemingly prepared to confess. However, instead of writing a confession, he began hitting himself with the pen. Authorities had to restrain him as he continued crying and shouting, claiming he was being framed for a crime he didn't commit. Following this, Anthony was charged with Lisa's murder, and her family was informed that her killer had finally been caught. The trial was delayed by 4 years. Then, when it began, Anthony appeared confident, even smirking. However, later he began displaying religious symbols, such as carrying a Bible and wearing a cross. Detectives believed this was a tactic to sway the jury. Anthony's lawyer argued that he was physically incapable of committing the crime. A medical condition, diagnosed 5 years prior, had weakened his muscles, making it extremely difficult to perform repetitive movements. The lawyer argued that given this condition, Anthony could not have inflicted the more than 20 stab wounds found on Lisa. According to the medical report that year, Anthony's health condition was recovered well at the time of the murder. The prosecution had strong evidence that placed Anthony at the scene case, including his skin under Lisa's fingernails, his blood on a pillowcase, and his fingerprint on the toilet seat. However, regardless of the evidence against him, Anthony consistently denied having seen Lisa since the late 80s. The prosecution presented a theory that Anthony had gone to Lisa's home, attempted to initiate intimate contact with she, and when she rejected, he brutally murdered her. After the crime, he cut off a piece of her hair and took it with him as he fled. Anthony Hughes was ultimately given a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 16 years. In 2031, when he will be 72 years old. Anthony is currently serving his sentence in prison. However, he still maintains his innocence and says he was wrongfully convicted. Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Jessica Dishon. Jessica Dishon was born on May 2, 1982, in the small town of Shepherdsville, Kentucky, USA. It was a quiet place where many residents made their living from farming and were very close to one another. Jessica had 2 younger brothers, Christopher and Michael. From a young age, she helped her parents, Mike and Edna, take care of them while they were at work. This made Jessica more independent, and her parents could always count on her. When she was 15, she started working part-time at a local restaurant, saving money to buy her first car. She dreamed of owning a red Pontiac, and after a few years, she had saved enough money to make this dream come true. Despite her part-time job, Jessica still achieved very good academic results and began planning to go to college to become an accountant. In the fall of 1999, when Jessica was 17, she entered her senior year and started dating a boy, which made her very excited. On the morning of Friday, September 10th, as usual, Jessica's parents went to work while she was still sleeping, and her younger brothers went to the bus stop and then to school. Jessica stayed home and was supposed to drive to school by herself. However, right after her brothers left, around noon, her mother, Edna, returned home and immediately noticed something strange. Jessica's car was parked in front of the house, even though she was supposed to be in class at that time. Edna went to Jessica's room, guessing that she might have overslept and not gone to school. However, Jessica was not in her bedroom. Edna then thought that, for some reason, Jessica might have asked her father, Mike, to drive her to school. She immediately called Mike, but he said he had gone to work alone that morning. Edna suspected that there was a problem with Jessica's car, so she took the spare key to try to start it. However, as she approached the car, she noticed a few disturbing things. The driver's door was slightly open. Jessica's cell phone was on the seat with the numbers 9 and 1 displayed on the screen, and under the front seat were a pair of shoes and her keys. In the back seat were her textbooks, work clothes, and purse. Edna immediately worried that the worst could have happened. It was clear that someone had tried to call 911 from Jessica's phone but couldn't get through. Furthermore, Jessica couldn't have left all her belongings in the car and left unexpectedly. Her family lived in the suburbs, so she would have had to walk several miles. Jessica's parents called the school and learned that she had missed class. However, the school did not notify them as they should have. A few hours later, Jessica's best friend from the place where they both worked called her parents, saying that Jessica had not shown up for her shift, which made them even more worried. Worried about Jessica's absence from school and work, as well as her belongings, including her phone with the 9 and 1 dial displayed being left in an unlocked car, her parents decided to call the police. However, the sheriff simply assumed that Jessica might have wandered off and would eventually return home. He did not notice that one of her shoes was left in the car, making it difficult for her to travel far without it. Jessica's parents tried to convince the sheriff that their daughter might be in danger, but despite their pleas, he refused to open an investigation, leaving them with no choice but to return home. After that, her parents took it upon themselves to search for her and contact acquaintances, but no one had any information about her. The next day, her parents returned to the sheriff and reported that Jessica had not returned home. This time, the police went to check Jessica's car but found another problem. The officers had searched the car without gloves, touching everything inside with their bare hands. They also did not follow standard procedure for checking Jessica's room. Jessica's parents, once again frustrated with the lack of professionalism from law enforcement, so sought the help of local media to draw attention to their daughter's disappearance and the police's lack of concern. Together with relatives and friends, they searched on their own and distributed flyers with information about Jessica. The search was led by Jessica's father and his brother, who were familiar with the area. Fearing the worst, they decided to search near a local river. The area had a bad reputation as it was dense, isolated, and popular with drug dealers and other criminals. For hours, Jessica's relatives searched the difficult terrain along the river but found no trace of her. The next morning, something unusual happened. Jessica's parents were at home, and their son was playing in the yard. Suddenly, the boy ran into the house, saying he heard a cry for help that sounded like his sister's. Jessica's father immediately grabbed the shotgun and ran outside to find the source of the cry. At the same time, his brother drove up to the house to join the search. Not long after, they noticed smoke coming from the property of their neighbor, a 40-year-old man named David Brooks. When they approached, they saw him burning something on the ground, which looked very suspicious. Jessica's father asked David for permission to search his farm. However, David refused and asked them to leave. It was not just David's strange behavior that was noteworthy. Before Jessica's disappearance, her family had maintained a normal relationship with David and his family. However, After Jessica went missing, David began to act strangely. He often drove slowly past Jessica's family's house and stared at them with a disturbing expression. Additionally, Jessica's parents received strange phone calls from a man who only panted without saying anything. Jessica's family suspected David might have had something to do with their daughter's disappearance, but they could not understand why he was behaving so oddly. Jessica's parents decided to contact the police again, despite having previously failed to get significant attention from the agency. They shared their observations, urged the officers to search David's property with dogs, and agreed to use Jessica's clothes to search for clues. The dogs led them to a fire pit on David's property, but they found no significant evidence. However, they did discover a pair of black gloves in one of the sheds, which indicated the presence of an odor associated with decomposition. Despite David's suspicious behavior, the police were still unable to connect him to Jessica's disappearance, and once again, they came up empty-handed. Frustrated with the local police, Jessica's father decided to contact the FBI. While the FBI typically did not investigate if only based on calls from relatives of missing persons, they decided to get involved immediately due to the disturbing facts presented by Jessica's parents. After a careful investigation, the FBI concluded that something truly terrible might have happened to Jessica. From this point on, a real investigation began, one that the local police had been reluctant to conduct. FBI agents collected fingerprints from Jessica's room and car, seized all potential evidence for analysis, and sent it to the lab. They also organized an extensive ground search using helicopters and gathered volunteers. Additionally, they thoroughly examined the bottom of the pond near Jessica's house, considering the possibility that her body might be there. FBI agents conducted a thorough search of David's farm and found a printed photo of Jessica. After this discovery, detectives were almost certain that David was involved in her disappearance. They also suspected his 35-year-old brother, Joseph, because he acted strangely while police were searching his property. Although investigators did not find enough evidence to arrest the brothers, they focused their efforts on thoroughly searching the area, as it was becoming increasingly likely that Jessica was no longer alive. On September 27, 17 days after Jessica went missing, police received a call from a woman driving along the road near where Jessica's father had been searching for her. The woman had seen a strange object near a tree on the side of the road and decided to check it out. The woman was shocked to discover it was a body. She immediately called the police. The FBI arrived at the scene and confirmed that the body was that of a young woman who was missing several fingers and toes. She had been bound with a rope that had traces of red and silver paint on her feet, and some of her clothing was also missing, suggesting that she had been sexually assaulted. Unfortunately, the state of decomposition of the body made it difficult to identify the victim. The police went to Jessica's home and asked her parents to assist in the identification process. Jessica's father was unable to look directly at body, but her mother agreed to do so. When she arrived at the scene, Edna initially could not identify her. However, Edna later noticed a small butterfly tattoo on the body that was identical to her daughter's and located in the same spot. Medical professionals later confirmed the deceased's identity as Jessica Dishon and determined that her cause of death was strangulation. Several bruises were also found on her body. The autopsy revealed that she had been alive for about 3 days after her disappearance, as her legs, arms, and fingers were still intact. This indicated that the police had a chance to save her, but they did not take any action to do so. After Jessica's body was discovered, the FBI decided to re-interview David. In the first interview, David claimed to have seen Jessica near her home on the morning she went missing. However, in a subsequent interview, he changed his story, stating that he had not seen her at all that day. He then claimed that he had been home in bed with his wife that morning. When detectives questioned David's wife, she contradicted his account. The FBI continued to question David, asking him what he would do if they found his fingerprints on the victim's body, even though no such evidence was discovered. David's response was suspicious. He said he would have to confess everything in that case. He subsequently failed a polygraph test, prompting the FBI to arrest him and proceed with trial. Although no solid evidence linked David to the murder, there were troubling circumstantial signs of his involvement, and the likelihood of a guilty verdict remained relatively low. Investigators continued to seek additional evidence as they prepared for trial. They recalled finding a rope similar to the one used to bind the victim's legs during a search of David's car. However, no DNA was found on it, making it an inconclusive piece of evidence. The trial began in January 2003, and David's attorney argued that there was insufficient evidence to convict his client. During the investigation, authorities discovered several missing body parts of the victim near the scene. They placed the parts in special containers and turned them over to local police, provide the requirement to keep them in a refrigerator. However, they left the containers at room temperature, which caused the parts to decompose quickly. Because the DNA and other evidence against David were not strong enough and the jury could not reach a unanimous decision, he was released. Under state law, he could only be charged again if new evidence was found. For Jessica's parents, this was a devastating blow. They were almost certain that David was the culprit behind their daughter's death. Furthermore, if the police had taken their job more seriously, their daughter might have been saved. Ultimately, they lost all hope for justice. In the years that followed, the case remained unsolved and gradually faded from memory. In 2012, a new detective, Lynn Hunt, joined the local police department. She was assigned to investigate cold cases, initially focusing on the murder of Jessica Dishon. When she reviewed the case files, she was shocked by the negligence of her predecessors. Most of the documents were filled with errors, lacked references to conversations with interested parties, and the evidence was not properly documented. The case had been handled so inefficiently that she had to start the investigation from scratch, although already 13 years after the murder. Lynn's first step was to contact Jessica's family. One of Jessica's brothers, now grown and living on his own, gave Lynn a box of Jessica's belongings that had been taken from her car. He had kept it since the police returned the items to the family. Lynn was once again confronted with her colleagues' poor handling of evidence, as it had not been properly stored. Although, after all these years, these items were unlikely to help her, she persisted in examining everything she could find. Through her research, she discovered information about David's medical examination results, which showed that his IQ was only 61, extremely low. This raised concerns about police operations, particularly regarding the questioning of him. Based on his significantly low IQ, he may not have fully understood the questions and may have given incomplete answers. This could indicate that he may not have been involved in the case, as his unusual behavior could be explained by his extremely low IQ. After a thorough investigation of everyone involved or living near the scene, nearly 15 years after Jessica's death, a colleague from another department called Lynn and shared new information from an inmate at the Kentucky State Prison who claimed to know the true identity of Jessica's killer. Lynn approached this lead with skepticism because, many times, when inmates try to provide information to the police, the end result is often frustration and wasted time. Many of them make up stories in hopes of getting released early or improving their prison conditions. However, she understood that this lead could not be ignored without verification. She visited the prison and met a man who was said to have relevant information. According to the man, he had shared a cell with a convicted child molester, the same crime as him. They became friends and exchanged details about their crimes. One day, the inmate told him that he had killed Jessica. The informant then revealing the man's name. It was Stanley Dish, Jessica's uncle and her father's younger brother. According to the informant, Stanley had confessed that he had sexually abused Jessica for years while they lived in the same household. Stanley had threatened to kill Jessica or her relatives if she spoke out. In the spring of 1999, when Jessica had a boyfriend, Stanley began to fear that she would eventually reveal her abuse by him. On the morning of September 10th, Stanley went to Jessica's home while she was alone. Jessica was getting into her car to leave when Stanley asked her to break up with her boyfriend. Jessica refused and threatened to report him if he did not leave her alone. When he refused, Stanley began to threaten Jessica. She tried to call 911, but Stanley grabbed her. Eventually, Jessica broke free and ran into the house. Stanley chased her down, beat her, then tied her up with bed sheets and took her to a nearby abandoned warehouse, where she was later found dead. Stanley held her captive for a long time, torturing and mentally abusing her before killing her. He then moved her body to a visible location near the road and buried it beneath the warehouse. He also claimed that after the murder, he had dismembered some of her body parts, hoping to deceive the police into thinking it was a drug deal gone wrong. Detective Lynn realized that information about the dismembered body parts had never been made public. Only Jessica's closest friends knew about it, so the informant could not have made this up. Finally, the man added that Stanley had buried Jessica's shoe under a broken tree near the shed. Lynn decided to verify all this information by searching for evidence. However, the local police station was short-staffed, so no one there could help her. She contacted Jessica's brother and a few other relatives, who agreed to join the search. She didn't tell them that Stanley might be the killer because she wanted to find some evidence to support these shocking accusations first. On the first day, they didn't find any clues in the heavy rain. They dug in areas that matched the description, but to no avail. The next day, Jessica's brother and Lynn returned to the scene. On the way, he showed her an abandoned shed on the side of the road. They went there and started digging inside, and almost immediately found a significant breakthrough. They discovered a buried bedsheet. Lynn collected this evidence and quickly went to Jessica's house. Over the years, Jessica's room had been kept exactly as it had been when her missing. Thanks to this, Lynn was able to confirm that the bedsheet found was part of Jessica's bedding, as it was not on the bed, and the other linens had the same pattern. Shortly after the evidence was discovered, Stanley was arrested and questioned. Although he appeared very nervous during the interrogation, he still refused to admit to the crime. He was eventually charged with murder, and the case went to trial. Jessica's father, Mike, could not believe that his own brother would commit such a cruel act against his daughter. He went through a period of complete denial but eventually accepted this unbearable truth. He recalled that in the early days of Jessica's disappearance, it was Stanley who suggested searching for the body near the riverbank. However, during the search, he suddenly felt nauseous and was taken home by his brother. It turned out that this incident occurred just a few hundred meters from the warehouse where Jessica lived, suggesting that Stanley had deliberately distracted them from searching for her while she was still alive. During the preparation for the trial, Detective Lynn carefully researched Stanley's past. She discovered that he had a previous conviction for assaulting another girl in the family. In addition, several other women reported that he had sexually abused them when they were children. He often took advantage of his relationship to stay at the victims' homes, then committed the crimes by threatening them not to speak out. The police concluded that he had committed these acts over a period of 3 decades. However, Detective Lynn found that securing a murder conviction would be difficult due to the lack of direct evidence such as fingerprints or DNA. She dug deeper into the case and stumbled upon an old box of files that had not been examined. When she looked through the contents, she was shocked again by the incompetence of those who had originally handled the case. The box contained a letter dated June 26, 2002, in which another informant had written to the police with the same story that Lynn had only heard 12 years later from a Kentucky inmate. In the summer of 2002, Stanley had been convicted of assaulting an underage relative. During that time, he had told a fellow inmate, who happened to be a police informant, about killing Jessica. The fellow inmate had written a letter to the department handling the case, revealing the gruesome details of what Stanley had done to his niece. The police simply ignored the letter and, perhaps believing that David had been involved all those years ago, did not consider other suspects. Lynn was frustrated by the lack of professionalism from her colleagues. Had they paid more attention to their work, the case might have been solved in 2002. For years, Jessica's family could only wait for the trial, hoping that Stanley would finally face the justice that had been delayed for his actions. The case began in 2015, and Stanley proclaimed his innocence. In court, Jessica's parents could barely look at the relative who had destroyed their lives. They were also furious that he would not admit to his actions to help them gain closure. The prosecution was concerned that the chances of securing a conviction for murder were slim, mainly due to the lack of substantial evidence. They were also worried about the charges of assault against the other girls in the family, as these witnesses would have to come to court and describe Stanley's behavior toward them in detail. To clarify, the prosecutor negotiated a plea deal with Stanley. Under the terms of the deal, the death penalty would be waived if Stanley pleaded guilty to the assault on his relative and to Jessica's murder. Stanley agreed to the deal, however. Part of the agreement stipulated that he did not have to reveal any further details about the crime. Jessica's parents were unhappy about this, as they wanted to know the whole truth. In the end, Stanley was sentenced to 20 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 15 years. Stanley was sentenced at the age of 56 and could have been released at the age of 71. After the trial, Jessica's father stated that if his brother hadn't died in prison, he would have waited for him to figure things out for himself. In 2019, Stanley gave his first interview and insisted that he did not kill Jessica. He claimed he was on his way to work that morning, but 2 decades later, he couldn't prove it. He could not explain why 2 independent informants had similar stories, including details only the killer would know, such as where the bedsheets were buried. David Brooks stated that police had not ruled out his involvement in the case. Stanley, who knew him, may have asked for his help in disposing of the victim's belongings. Due to his low IQ, Brooks may not have understood the full extent of the situation. It is possible that he burned Jessica's clothes in a fire, and that Stanley gave him gloves that had a scent detectable by dogs. However, the truth may never be revealed, as Brooks passed away in 2021 due to heart problems. On the 3rd day after Jessica went missing, her younger brother heard screams outside and thought it was his sister calling for help. However, it is impossible to say for certain what happened at that time. Jessica could still be alive, but Stanley might have kept her in a shed a few miles from her home. In this case, it is more likely that the child imagined the incident due to stress or that someone else was screaming. However, there is another theory, although it seems unlikely. We know that shortly after Jessica's father rushed out, Stanley drove up to the house, which indicates he was nearby. Therefore, it is possible that the girl was in his car with her mouth covered or unconscious. In spite of this hypothesis appears very unlikely. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Els van Doren. Els van Doren was a 38-year-old Belgian woman married to Jan de Wild, a jeweler. Together, they had 2 children, Vincent and Carol. Although he worked in his family's jewelry store, Els van Doren's real passion had been skydiving. She initially took up the sport with her husband in 1994, but she quickly overcame his interest as her passion for skydiving grew. Els van Doren was an experienced skydiver with 2,300 jumps. Every weekend and holiday, she spent time skydiving. In 1998, she began formation jumping, and in 2001, she became a member of an all-female skydiving team called the Divas. The team competed at the World Skydiving Championships in 2003. However, Els van Doren had to leave the team in 2004 due to a herniated disc. After recovering, Els van Doren decided to skydive more for fun than for competition. She joined the Zwartberg Parachute Club, where she met a fellow skydiver and close friend, Els Babs Klotmans, who was 26 years old and a school teacher. To avoid confusion within the club, Els van Doren suggested the nickname Babs for her young friend. Both women were acquainted with Marcel Summers, a member of the Zwartberg Parachute Club. As Els van Doren, Babs, and Marcel became acquainted, Els van Doren found herself developing a strong relationship with Marcel, which eventually became a romantic relationship. Even though she was married, Els van Doren was able to keep her relationship with Marcel a secret because her family was used to her spending weekends at the skydiving club. She often visited Marcel's apartment on weekends without arousing her husband's suspicion. What Els van Doren didn't know was that she not only shared a name with Babs, they also shared a man, Marcel. Unbeknownst to both Els van Doren and Babs, Marcel had been secretly hooking up with both of them, devising a plan to manage his time with each of them. Friday was for Babs, while Saturday was for Els van Doren. This arrangement worked for Marcel for a while, but it didn't last long. On Friday evening, November 10, 2006, something unexpected happened. As planned, Babs went to Marcel's residence for a weekly meeting, but what she didn't know was that Els van Doren had also decided to surprise Marcel that night. Babs and Marcel had just finished dinner and were returning to their apartment when they met Els van Doren, who was waiting outside the door. That night, Babs did not sleep in Marcel's bed as expected. Instead, she slept in a sleeping bag on the living room floor, while Marcel and her friend, Els van Doren, were in the bedroom. While in the living room, Babs noticed Els van Doren's parachute and skydiving equipment nearby. Feeling hurt and betrayed by her friend's actions, Babs acted in a way that would ultimately have devastating consequences. On November 18, 2006, 12 members of the skydiving club, including Els van Doren, Babs, and Marcel, boarded a flight over Flanders. Their plan was to jump in a four-person formation from 13,000 feet with Tom, another skydiver. During the jump, they would hold hands before leaving and opening their parachutes. Els van Doren and Tom jumped out of the plane as scheduled, but Babs seemed to have jumped a little late. As they free fell, Babs struggled to keep up with the group. At an altitude of 9,000 feet, Marcel, Els van Doren, and Tom decided to break formation to safely open their parachutes. That's when they realized something serious was going on. Els van Doren's parachute wouldn't open when she pulled the rope. Remaining calm, Els van Doren recalled her emergency training and remembered a previous experience where she had successfully deployed her reserve parachute after the main parachute failed. Els van Doren was plummeting towards the ground at a speed of 200 kilometers per hour, with only 20 seconds to perform an emergency maneuver to ensure a safe landing. Despite her best efforts, pulling the reserve parachute cord had no effect and the parachute could not open. In a state of panic, Els van Doren continued to pull both the main parachute rope and the backup parachute rope. But nothing happened. Marcel, at an altitude of 800 meters, witnessed Els van Doren's desperate struggle from afar. He was 300 meters above Els van Doren, who was only 500 meters above the ground, and he knew something was wrong because her parachute had not opened. However, he was powerless to intervene and could only watch in horror. In a last-ditch effort, Els van Doren tried to untangle her parachute in hopes of activating it, but it was too late. Her life ended. Meanwhile, in Upavbeek town, a woman was drying laundry in her garden when she heard a loud noise. She looked up and saw a person falling from the sky with a parachute, heading straight for her garden. This site was not unusual as her house was located near a skydiving club and its landing strip. She suddenly noticed a piece of white cloth stuck to her bush. When she got closer, she saw a person lying in the bushes. She immediately called her husband, who was working in the garden, and they quickly called emergency services. Meanwhile, Marcel had landed safely and was desperately searching for Els van Doren. He spotted an ambulance and followed it to the scene where Els van Doren had landed. As he rushed towards her, he was restrained by the emergency team so they could work. Despite their efforts to resuscitate her, Els van Doren died. Marcel emphasized that Els van Doren's parachute was inoperable, pointing out that it was unusual for both the main and reserve parachutes to fail to open. He then contacted Els van Doren's husband, Jan, to tell him the news. Jan rushed to his wife's side, while Tom and Babs returned to the skydiving club to break the tragic news to the other members. The news was heartbreaking. Babs was overcome with grief, falling to her knees and crying in pain. Els van Doren's husband, Jan, went to the skydiving club to pick up her belongings. When he arrived, he met Babs, who offered to help him. However, Jan found it strange that Babs seemed to stand still with a strange grin on her face. She walked towards the dressing room with Jan following, but then suddenly locked the door, leaving Jan outside. After a long wait, Babs finally walked out carrying Els van Doren's belongings. At the scene of the accident, police found Els van Doren's parachute and helmet. The helmet had a camera that recorded her final jump. An autopsy was performed to see if Els van Doren's death was caused by any internal cause. Results showed no signs of alcohol or drugs, leading investigators to conclude that her death was a murder or suicide. This conclusion was based on the severe fractures and internal bleeding caused by the fall. Els van Doren's family suspected that she might have been murdered by someone in her own skydiving club, someone who knew how parachutes worked. As a result, club members were asked not to attend her funeral, but some of Els van Doren's close friends chose to ignore this request. The family's suffering became even greater when police revealed that Els van Doren had a secret affair with Marcel Summers that lasted more than 5 years. Jan was especially hurt when he learned that some of his club members knew about the affair, people he considered friends, but they all had kept quiet. What was even more painful was that Els van Doren had told her clubmates that she had divorced her husband, which was not true. Els van Doren had passed away just one day before her child Carol's 15th birthday. At the funeral, Carol gave a heartfelt speech, recalling how her family had prevented her mother from skydiving. They had longed for her to be with them, but Carol also admitted that her mother had been a unique person who wouldn't have been happy if she had given up what she loved. After the funeral, police began investigating the incident with Els van Doren's reserve parachute. They sent a skydiving expert to check the parachute and look for abnormalities. Experts quickly discovered a critical problem: the pilot chute, a small auxiliary parachute that helped deploy the main or reserve parachute, was missing. Obviously, someone had deliberately removed it. Experts also discovered that the main parachute activation cord and one of the cords connecting to the emergency parachute had been cut. During the final review of body cam footage of Els van Doren's fatal skydiving accident, an unidentified piece of red fabric was seen in front of her. Investigators were unable to identify the object as part of Els van Doren's equipment. They therefore asked Oplab residents to thoroughly search their garden and surrounding area for the piece of red cloth and warned them to handle it carefully if found, as it could be potential evidence containing the DNA of the person responsible for sabotaging Els van Doren's parachute. Unfortunately, no one was able to find the piece of fabric. A week after Els van Doren's death, a surprising discovery was made when Babs found the pilot chute. According to Babs, she had discovered the parachute hanging from a tree while driving between Oplab and Genk on the way back from Marcel's apartment. Instead of contacting the police directly, she told Marcel about the discovery. Marcel then called the police, who arrived at the location and found Babs visibly shaken and emotional. The police were skeptical of Babs' story, as they found it unusual that she had stumbled upon the pilot chute. Babs insisted it had been just a coincidence, explaining that she had taken a different route home and had been delayed by a slow-moving tractor. She said this delay had caused her to look up and see the parachute hanging about 20 meters above her, which she interpreted as a sign from Els Van Doorn. The police were suspicious because they knew that only investigators knew that the pilot had been missing. At that time, 3 people were the main suspects in Els Van Doorn's suspected murder case: her husband Jan, her lover Marcel, and her friend Babs. Police searched Marcel's residence and eventually identified him as a suspect. They later also cleared Jan as a suspect. They then searched Babs' home and confiscated items such as her phone, laptop, and diary. In her diary, she had written down her feelings following the advice of her psychiatrist. Later, Els Klotmans, also known as Babs, was questioned by the police about her relationship with Marcel and what had happened to Els Van Doorn. During the interrogation, Babs insisted she had had nothing to do with Els Van Doorn's parachute. She blamed Marcel, claiming that he had often taken care of Els Van Doorn's equipment when she stayed at his place on the weekends, or blamed Jan, claiming that Els Van Doorn had often left her belongings at his house during the week. After the initial interrogation, Babs was released and went home. However, she did not appear for a second interview scheduled for December 20, 2006. It was later discovered that that morning she had tried to take her own life by drinking a combination of sleeping pills and antidepressants. Her mother had found her unresponsive and immediately took her to the hospital for emergency treatment. Before attempting suicide, Babs had written letters to loved ones expressing her struggle to cope with the loss of her close friend and the extreme stress of being a suspect in a murder case. After recovering, Babs had been admitted to a psychiatric hospital for 15 days for close observation. This had not been her first attempt at self-harm, as she had previously been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and depression. Marcel ended their relationship, believing her actions had been more a call for attention than an actual attempt to commit suicide. He thought she had taken the pill just before her mother had been due to return home, suggesting her main goal had been to divert attention from suspicion of involvement in the murder of Els Van Doorn. Marcel thought the police had been trying to track down Babs and arrest her based on her lies. While still under psychiatric care, Babs had been arrested on January 11, 2007, as a suspect in the murder of Els Van Doorn. When Babs appeared in court on January 19, 2007, authorities decided that she would be detained while the investigation was ongoing. Authorities asked Babs to take a polygraph test, but she refused and it was never taken. A thorough examination of Els Van Doorn's parachute equipment had showed that someone had deliberately cut the parachute cord with scissors. The investigation revealed that the person responsible might have been right-handed. Babs spent 3 months in prison by March 2007, having to endure many interrogations. During questioning, she denied any wrongdoing but admitted sending anonymous letters to Els Van Doorn. The letter affirmed that Els Van Doorn's actions towards her family were wrong. Jan found the letter, but he interpreted it as a criticism of Els Van Doorn's frequent absences due to parachuting. However, Babs' intention had been to warn Els Van Doorn to end her relationship with Marcel. Babs also confessed to calling Marcel anonymously, especially when he had been with Els Van Doorn. She had intended to threaten them. Investigators analyzed Babs' automatic activation device, AAD, and discovered that Babs had jumped with the rest of the team and deployed her parachute beforehand. This supposedly allowed Babs to witness events unfold from above and monitor where Els Van Doorn's parachute would land. Babs could have landed and retrieved the parachute later. Babs' trial in the murder of Els Van Doorn began on September 24, 2010. Babs had been quickly arrested. The prosecution felt confident that they had enough evidence to prove Babs had committed murder. They believed Babs had been motivated by jealousy because she had discovered her lover, Marcel Summers, had been having an affair with her best friend, Els Van Doren. Babs had previously told investigators that she knew Marcel preferred Els Van Doren to her. The prosecution argued that Babs had wanted to eliminate Els Van Doren as a rival. However, Babs' defense argued that the prosecution's case had been based on circumstantial evidence and unproven allegations. During the trial, Babs claimed that she had not seen a future with Marcel and only had an intimate relationship with him because of her low self-esteem. She even suggested that Els Van Doren's daughter, Carol, might have wanted to harm her mother for being away for the weekend. However, despite her efforts to manipulate the jury and shift blame, the judge's verdict prevailed. On October 20, 2010, Babs had been convicted of murdering her friend Els Van Doren and received a 30-year prison sentence. During the trial, Babs, steadfastly maintaining her innocence, had been closely monitored to prevent her from harming herself again. She later filed an appeal claiming that the police had interrogated her without a lawyer. In May 2011, her appeal was dismissed. In June 2022, after serving 12.5 years in prison, Babs was conditionally released after a third appeal and is now free. It is a pity that Els Van Doren had suffered a tragic fate and that her family had suffered immense pain when the truth had been revealed. Our sincerest condolences go out to the family and loved ones of Els Van Doren, who will be deeply missed. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Jennifer Schuett. Jennifer Schuett is an 8-year-old girl who has just completed elementary school. She lives with her single mother, Elaine, who has worked hard to provide her daughter with a comfortable life. Elaine always tries to give Jennifer a happy childhood, full of love and care. Thanks to that, Jennifer has become a cheerful, active girl who loves to explore and learn. However, Jennifer still has a common fear in children, which is the fear of the dark. Therefore, she often sleeps in the same room as her mother. Elaine understands this fear and is always by her daughter's side. On the night of August 9, 2009, mother and daughter slept in the same room again. But Jennifer did not sleep well, constantly turning and lightly kicking her mother, making it difficult for Elaine to sleep. Elaine woke up at 2:30 a.m. and suggested Jennifer sleep in her own room so she could rest before the new workday. But Jennifer replied convincingly, "Mom, I'm going to sleep in my own room tonight because I love you," and she went to her own room to sleep for the rest of the night. Elaine regretted the decision for a long time, but at the time, she couldn't have known what would happen next. The next morning, Elaine went to wake Jennifer but found her missing. She found the window facing the parking lot wide open. Elaine quickly called 911. When the police arrived, she said she hadn't heard any noise or screaming after Jennifer went back to her room to sleep alone. Their apartment was on the first floor, and the window in Jennifer's room looked out onto the parking lot, causing Elaine to fear that someone might have seen Jennifer and entered the room through the window. Elaine realized that their apartment wasn't the ideal place for her and her little girl to live, but it was the best they could afford at the time. However, Elaine's parents decided to help her and her daughter find a new place to live. They bought a small house nearby and renovated it. Jennifer and her mother planned to move there in a few months, and they were there the day before Jennifer went missing. After her daughter went missing, Elaine was extremely sad and remorseful. She said that Jennifer was all she had and prayed that she could return. The police worked tirelessly to find Jennifer. Fortunately, Elaine did not have to wait long for news. Around 6:30 p.m. that same day, the police received a call from parents whose children were playing in the fields and accidentally discovered a little girl. When they arrived at the scene, the police found 8-year-old Jennifer Schuett lying in the middle of a field, 5 kilometers from her home. Jennifer's condition was serious, with a cut on her throat from ear to ear, causing her to lose a lot of blood and turn pale. Jennifer was taken to the hospital in critical condition, where doctors tried to save her life. Due to the injury to her neck, Jennifer was unable to speak. After surgery, Jennifer's condition stabilized, the bleeding stopped, and her breathing was steady. However, when Jennifer woke up from surgery, her mental state changed dramatically. She began to fear all men, including male doctors, making it difficult for her to recover. During this time, Jennifer was constantly panicking and even reacted defensively when male doctors tried to approach her. Elaine tried to explain to her daughter that everyone around her wanted to help and care for her. However, Jennifer did not trust anyone. Her behavior was understandable when she finally revealed what happened to her that night. The challenge was to gently get the information out of her. Now, considering she was only 8 years old, this was really difficult. Jennifer was too scared to speak directly to the investigators, so the detectives gave her a notebook and pen to write down her answers to their questions. Because she was afraid of men, Jennifer wrote a letter to her mother, who then forwarded it to the police. Although she was only 8 years old, Jennifer's written responses were surprisingly detailed and accurate. Jennifer explained that she went into her room, turned on the lights, and began reading a book to help her fall asleep. She eventually fell asleep but was then awakened by a stranger who carried her out of the house. The stranger ran down the sidewalk with Jennifer in his arms. As soon as Jennifer realized what was happening, she tried to scream, but the stranger covered her nose and mouth. The stranger then put Jennifer in his car and identified himself as an undercover police officer. However, Jennifer's instincts told her that something was wrong. She looked around and saw her mother's car in the parking lot, which made her even more confused about where they were going and why. Jennifer had been taught that the police were trustworthy, but she had also been warned not to trust strangers. Her fear and recent experiences with strangers made her suspicious of the stranger's words, and she sensed that something was wrong. Jennifer asked the stranger to drop her off at her grandparents' house. But he refused, saying that they were not home. However, she noticed that her grandparents' car was in the driveway, which suggested that he was lying. The man stopped near Jennifer's school, about 3 kilometers from her house. He told her to watch the moon closely and said that her mother would come when the moon changed color. Jennifer waited anxiously for her mother to pick her up, but her mother never showed up. She suspected that the man was preparing for his true intentions. After 5 minutes, the stranger announced that her mother would not be coming and that they needed to drive further. They stopped at a dead-end street, where Jennifer asked the stranger to prove that he was a real police officer. She questioned him, asking where his gun and badge were. When he said that his gun was in the back seat, Jennifer turned around to look for it. That was when the stranger removed her underwear. Jennifer then lost consciousness, so she was not sure how long she was under his control. Jennifer slowly regained consciousness as she was dragged through a field, her ankles constantly rubbing against the road. The pain from the branches and rocks stabbed into her back, but she pretended to be dead and kept quiet, realizing that this was her chance to survive. Her attacker eventually let go of her legs and left her in the field. Jennifer heard him walk away, followed by the sound of his car door slamming and the sound of the engine driving away. When she regained consciousness, Jennifer found that she could not scream, and she was not sure why. She mustered enough strength to bring her right hand to her neck, where she discovered an open wound. Her hand was covered in blood. The exact time she had been missing is unknown, but it is believed that she had been lying in the field for between 12 and 14 hours. As the sun began to set, Jennifer saw the lights of passing cars nearby and heard the sounds of children. A dog approached her several times, seemingly trying to get its owner's attention, but no one came. Throughout her suffering, Jennifer was bitten by fire ants, which helped her stay conscious. Each time she woke up, she could not believe that she was not dead. Jennifer had accepted her fate, thinking that she would not survive. But everything changed when she heard the sounds of children nearby. Suddenly, something hit her leg. When Jennifer later regained consciousness, she found herself being reassured by a police officer who repeatedly told her, "You've been found, you'll be okay. Just stay with me." The officer's words provided comfort to Jennifer as she was loaded into the Lifeline helicopter. The aftermath was a challenging experience for 8-year-old Jennifer, who struggled to communicate due to her inability to speak. She had to write her answers down on paper to convey her story. Additionally, her fear of men made the situation even more complicated. To make her feel more comfortable, her mother stepped in to ask questions on behalf of the police, relaying Jennifer's answers to the officers waiting behind the door. What's remarkable about Jennifer's story is that, despite her ordeal, she was able to remember the stranger's name. She remembered the man telling her his name was Dennis and describing him as fat, with a possible scar on his face. Police also sought the assistance of forensic pathologist Lois Gibson. Although they could only communicate with Jennifer through gestures and notes, they were able to create an extremely detailed composite sketch of the suspect. The sketch was released in the hope of getting information from the public about the identity of the man in the drawing. Meanwhile, police continued to investigate the scene and found Jennifer's clothes about half a mile away, along with a man's clothes. Despite hopes of finding DNA on the clothes to catch the culprit, no matches were found. Jennifer gradually recovered from her injuries. Despite her young age, she showed incredible resilience. During her recovery, there was a moment when she was upset about a chocolate bar that she couldn't eat. She screamed in frustration and let out a weak sound. The doctors were amazed to see that her vocal cords, which had been nearly severed and were not expected to heal, began to miraculously recover. After a while, Jennifer was well enough to be discharged from the hospital. She returned home and went back to school, eventually finishing high school and college. After that, Jennifer decided to become a children's librarian. Even so, she never forgot what happened that night. Every day, she felt like she was chasing a criminal, and that the criminal could be anyone. Jennifer thought that it could be her new neighbor, or a stranger at the post office or the grocery store. She always felt like the person was watching her and would come back to kill her. Fortunately, Jennifer met a guy named Jonathan. For the first time in years, she was able to trust a man. They fell in love and Jennifer felt a little more secure. However, around that time, the clues to her attacker began to fade. The chances of finding him were slim. Her case was passed from investigator to investigator. But still no progress was made. 18 years after that terrible night, Jennifer received a phone call. It was a notice that Detective Tim Cromie was taking over her case and wanted to meet with her. Tim Cromie pledged to do everything he could to catch the criminal. Jennifer trusted him, and Tim Cromie told her that he would do everything in his power until the end of his career to get the answers she needed about this case. To help with the case, Tim decided to involve FBI agent Richard Renison in the investigation. Richard had worked for the Dickinson, Texas police before joining the FBI. Tim and Richard discovered a large amount of evidence collected on the day Jennifer went missing and shortly after she was found. Jennifer's underwear, shirt, and other items belonging to the perpetrator were particularly important, so they sent a sample of the DNA found on the clothing to Quantico, Virginia. Although the detectives knew that technology had advanced significantly in the 19 years since the crime, they understood that the age of the case could cause the evidence to not be prioritized in the lab. Despite the years, their work finally paid off. The man whose DNA was found at the crime scene was Dennis Earl Bradford, the man Jennifer had described years earlier. The 8-year-old Jennifer had described the man with astonishing accuracy, even though she was on pain medication at the time and unable to speak. Dennis Bradford, 39, lived in North Little Rock, Arkansas. His DNA was entered into the national database after an attack on a woman he met at a bar in 1996. Although he was sentenced to 12 years in prison, he only served 4. Dennis was released on parole on February 4, 2000. Less than a year later, police arrested Bradford for drunk driving less than half a mile from his home. He later remarried and worked as a welder until his arrest in 2009. Investigators Tim Cromie and Richard Renison found a lot of information about Dennis. In 1987, Dennis had been arrested in Dickinson, 3 years before the attack on Jennifer. The investigators discovered that he had 2 addresses within 2 miles of Jennifer's residence, and Jennifer was able to confirm his identity as the kidnapper. They then requested a photo of Dennis's driver's license from when he was 19. Upon seeing the photo, they were shocked because the man looked very similar to the sketch created based on Jennifer's description at age 8. On October 19, 2009, Dennis Cyril Bradford was arrested. However, he claimed that he did not remember why he stopped near Jennifer's residence or why he had mistreated her. Dennis also revealed a detail that investigators did not know. After the attack, he felt so overwhelmed by guilt that he attempted suicide with a handgun. Despite reaching for the gun, Dennis was ultimately unable to pull the trigger and decided to seek psychiatric help. During his stay at the psychiatric hospital, Dennis accidentally visited the hospital where Jennifer was still a patient, and he was very close to her at the time. Immediately after the interview, the detectives informed Jennifer of Dennis Bradford's arrest. She expressed gratitude to the detectives, especially Detective Tim Cromie and Agent Richard Renison, for their efforts and their promise not to drop the case. She also admitted that she looked forward to facing Dennis Bradford in court because he was willing to plead guilty and not drag out the trial. Jennifer was given the opportunity to choose a court date, and she chose August 10, the 20th anniversary of the attack. A turning point in the case came on May 10, 2010, a few months before the trial, when Dennis hanged himself in his cell. Jennifer faced another challenge in her life due to the trauma Dennis caused. She almost lost the ability to conceive. Fortunately, Dr. Craig Witz, after hearing Jennifer's story, generously offered her his services for free twice in late 2012. As a happy ending, Jennifer and her husband eventually welcomed their daughter Jenna and then their son Jonah. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Shannon Christian. Hugh Christopher Newsom Jr., commonly known as Christopher, was born on September 21, 1983 in Knoxville, Tennessee, to Mary and Hugh Newsom in a large, loving family. As the youngest child, he was doted on by his family. Christopher was an athlete as a youngster, particularly excelling at baseball during his school years. His coach believed he had a bright future in the sport, but a serious injury and lengthy recovery ended his promising athletic career. Christopher was a man of many talents. In addition to being an excellent artist and guitar player, he was skilled in carpentry and had knowledge of cars and motorcycles. As a young man, Christopher dreamed of becoming a mechanic, but he ended up spending much of his time on his passion for carpentry. After graduating from high school, Christopher attended the University of Tennessee, where he studied hard and became one of the top students. Shannon Gale Christian was born on April 29, 1985, in Nagdoy, Texas, the youngest of 2 children born to Dina and Gary Christian. She grew up with her older brother, Chase, and the two had a close relationship. In 1997, the family moved to Knoxville, Tennessee, where the children attended local schools and their parents started a small business. At home, Dina conducted individual therapy sessions. Shannon was an outgoing and kind girl who shared her mother's interest in psychology. After graduating from high school, she studied sociology at the University of Tennessee and worked part-time to save money for a car. On her 21st birthday, her family helped her buy the silver Toyota 4Runner of her dreams. In 2006, when Shannon was 21 and Christopher was 23, they met through mutual friends at college. It was love at first sight and they quickly became attached. After only a month, Christopher introduced Shannon to his parents and expressed his future intentions to her. Shannon reciprocated by introducing Christopher to her family, and he was warmly welcomed. In October 2006, an important family dinner was held, attended by both parents and siblings. Discussions revolved around Shannon and Christopher's deep feelings for each other, their plans to get married after graduating from college. Everyone was happy and full of hope for the future, unaware of the tragedy that was about to happen to their family. On January 6, 2007, Shannon and Christopher were invited to a mutual friend's birthday party. That Saturday, Shannon went to a beauty salon to prepare for the celebration, parking her car in a nearby underground garage where they planned to meet. However, Christopher arrived late, leading to a small argument between them because they were late for the event. Shannon and Christopher's friends were worried when the couple missed the party. Normally, they were very responsible people and would not miss an event without notice. People tried to contact them by phone but were unsuccessful. In this situation, Shannon's best friend called her mother several times late at night to check on her, but also received no response. The next morning, Shannon's mother, Dina, noticed that her daughter had not returned home. She was not too worried at first, thinking that Shannon might have stayed at Christopher's house after the party or gone straight to work because she had a shift on Sunday. However, Dina's worries increased when she saw several missed calls from unknown numbers in the middle of the night. When she called back, she was informed that Shannon and Christopher had not attended the birthday party and could not be reached. This caused Dina to panic, thinking that something bad had happened to her daughter. Neither Shannon nor Christopher answered their phone calls. Christopher's parents were also surprised, thinking that he was at Shannon's house. The situation became even more worrying when they discovered that Shannon had not gone to work. Both sets of parents immediately called the police, but the response was lukewarm. The police thought that Shannon and Christopher might have wanted some time alone and could not be tracked down. They also followed protocol to only consider an adult missing after 24 hours of no contact. For Shannon and Christopher, however, those 24 hours were crucial. Their parents and friends searched frantically for them. They contacted everyone they knew, checked hospitals, distributed flyers, and used social media to find information. However, no leads emerged. Shannon was last seen at the hair salon on Saturday, when she only talked about an upcoming party. On Monday, January 8th, the police began searching for Shannon and Christopher. By this time, thanks to the efforts of family and friends, the whole city knew about their disappearance. A railway worker discovered badly damaged human remains on an embankment along the tracks. The bodies were in a terrible state, with multiple injuries and burned with a flammable liquid. The police cordoned off the area and investigated, but found no significant clues. After being photographed, the remains were taken to the morgue for an autopsy and an attempt at identification. Although this would be difficult due to the extensive damage to the body, the autopsy revealed that the victim was a young man who had been brutally murdered. He had suffered multiple serious injuries before his death, including losing most of his teeth due to beatings. He had been shot 3 times, twice in the back and once fatally in the head. Evidence also suggested that he had been raped multiple times by at least 3 different attackers. Police identified the victim as Christopher, a young man who had recently gone missing, based on his physical appearance. They contacted the Newsom family to obtain a DNA sample for confirmation. The DNA results eventually confirmed that it was Christopher. Meanwhile, the search for Shannon continued. Although devastated by the news of Christopher, the Shannon family remained hopeful that she was alive. Shannon's last cell phone signal was detected in a dangerous area of Knoxville where neither of them frequented, suggesting they may have been coerced into going there and that Shannon may still be held in the area. Shannon's Toyota 4Runner was found abandoned in a deserted alley. The car was in such bad condition that her parents barely recognized it. It was dirty, scratched, had a broken light, and flat tires. Shannon's personal belongings were gone, replaced by cigarette butts and a damaged car seat. The driver's seat was pushed back, suggesting the last driver was a large man. An envelope with the address 2316 Chipman Street was found between the seats. A witness reported seeing 4 black men driving the SUV on Saturday night. Fingerprints on the envelope led police to Lamarcus Davidson, a man with a criminal record. His home was in a remote industrial area. When no one answered, police forced their way in, hoping to find Shannon alive. Inside the house, police found Shannon's personal items, including a wallet and stuffed toys, along with headphones and Christopher's baseball cap. They also found a bloody knife and torn, bloody women's clothing. Shannon's body was found in the house's trash bin, wrapped in dirty bedsheets and 5 trash bags, in a fetal position. Experts estimate she died in the early morning hours of January 8. This suggests that if police had started searching immediately after receiving the missing person report instead of waiting 24 hours, Shannon could have been saved. The condition of Shannon's body shocked even experienced forensic experts. Her entire body was covered in bruises, scratches, cuts and cigarette burns. Injuries to her genitals, mouth, and throat suggested she had been sexually assaulted by multiple men. Shannon also had severe head injuries and internal bleeding in her abdomen, possibly from being kicked. The attackers brutally tortured her by stabbing her multiple times. They tried to erase her DNA by pouring bleach on her, especially her wounds and private parts, and even forced her to drink bleach. They then wrapped her in a garbage bag, stuffed her in a trash can, and covered her up. She slowly died of suffocation and blood loss, unable to escape or call for help. 5 suspects have been identified in the murders of Shannon Christian and Christopher Newsom. Lamarcus Davidson, the main suspect, was immediately sought. Police are also looking for Eric Boyd, another suspect in connection with the crime scene. Eric was arrested on January 11 and cooperated with the investigation, claiming his innocence. He revealed where Lamarcus was hiding and led police there. He was arrested without resistance. When he was arrested, he was wearing the shoes of the deceased victim. During questioning, Lamarcus tried to minimize his role by claiming to be the victim. He said Shannon and Christopher had come to his house to buy drugs but had gotten into an argument with an acquaintance of his. He claimed he had left to avoid involvement and the violence that had occurred in his absence. Subsequent interviews revealed 3 more people involved: Davidson's friend George Thomas, LaTalvis Cobbins, and Vanessa Coleman, 18. The 5 suspects were arrested and held separately for questioning. They blamed each other, inadvertently revealing details of the crime. From their fragmentary statements, police were able to reconstruct the sequence of events and the roles each person played in the crime. Lamarcus, a newly paroled man, was having financial difficulties. He had started dealing drugs and needed a car to make deliveries. He decided to steal a car from an underground parking lot without security cameras and went there with his accomplices. Unfortunately, Shannon and Christopher were in the parking lot at the time and were arguing. The gang decided to kidnap them so as not to leave any witnesses. They held them at gunpoint and put them in the trunk of the car. The couple were taken to Lamarcus's house, where they were brutally beaten and raped. After midnight, Christopher was forced into the trunk of the car, naked and barefoot. He was taken to the train tracks, forced to walk on gravel, and shot twice in the back and once in the head. His body was then doused with flammable liquid and set on fire to destroy the evidence. After attacking Christopher, the gang returned to the house, where Shannon was still tied up. The next day, she was subjected to brutal torture, causing severe injuries to her entire body. They eventually doused her with bleach and stuffed her into a plastic garbage bag while she was still alive, causing her to slowly suffocate. It is unclear when Vanessa Coleman joined the group. She claimed that she was forced to participate in the crimes. However, Eric pointed out that Vanessa was Lamerica's girlfriend and participated willingly, even taking Shannon's jewelry and phone. The investigation determined that Lamaricus Davidson, born in 1981, was the leader of the group and the main instigator of the brutal acts. Lamaricus attempted to deflect blame and minimize his role, while placing the blame on the dead victims. Lamaricus was convicted of 40 counts, including assault, kidnapping, robbery, and premeditated murder. The jury unanimously decided to sentence Lamaricus to death for his brutal acts. Latalvis Cobbins, born in 1982, initially faced the death penalty for torture, assault, and participation in the murder. He was eventually sentenced to life in prison without parole. George Thomas, born in 1983, was also sentenced to the same sentence for similar crimes, with no chance of parole. Eric Boyd cooperated with the investigation and helped capture Lamaricus, and was sentenced to 18 years in prison. The victim's family said the sentence was too lenient. Vanessa Coleman, the only woman involved in the atrocities, was sentenced to 53 years in prison. In 2011, the case took a surprising turn when the presiding judge resigned due to drug addiction, calling his ability to judge into question. The verdicts from the previous 2 years were overturned, leading to a retrial, including the case of Christian and Christopher. A new judge was appointed to retry all 5 defendants. As a result, Lamaricus was still sentenced to death. Latalvis continues to serve life without parole. George was sentenced to life with the possibility of parole after 51 years. Vanessa had her sentence reduced from 53 years to 35 years. Her appeal in 2014 was rejected, and her request for parole in 2017 was also denied. In 2020, the parole board decided that she must continue serving her sentence until at least April 2032. Eric Boyd's case took a significant turn. Initially, he received a shorter sentence for cooperating with investigators. However, new evidence later proved his involvement in the assaults and deaths of both victims. At his retrial, his accomplice George testified against him, revealing previously unknown details about Eric's role. As a result, Eric was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. George, who originally faced the possibility of parole after 51 years, had his sentence reduced by 15% for his testimony, provided he maintains good behavior. Eric's attempts to appeal his new sentence were unsuccessful, and he is currently incarcerated at the Bledsoe County Correctional Complex. Lamaricus continues to be held at the maximum security Riverbend institution as he awaits execution. The case had a profound impact on the public and legal system. It received extensive media coverage and resulted in the passage of 2 new laws. The first law was designed to protect victims from attempts to defame them or shift blame onto them during trials. This legislation was a direct response to the defense team's strategy, which falsely portrayed the murdered students as drug users and thrill seekers in a dangerous area. These baseless accusations caused significant distress to the victims' families. The second law removed the requirement for a judge's signature on a unanimous jury verdict. If this law had been in effect during this case, it could have avoided the need for retrials and sentence reviews. The house at 2316 Chipman Street, where the young couple was tortured, was demolished in the fall of 2008. A memorial was built there to honor Shannon Christian and Christopher Newsom. In Christian's memory, a golf tournament and a charitable foundation were established to support violence victims. Similarly, a foundation in Newsom's name was created, hosting annual memorial baseball tournaments at Halls Park and offering a scholarship named after him, as he was a student and former baseball player. Initially, the media misrepresented details of the case, whether accidentally or intentionally, despite the public outcry and widespread attention. Many people believed that differences in reporting and delays in coverage were racially motivated because the victims were white and the perpetrators were African American. However, the head of the Association of Criminal Writers and Editors remarked, "I can't confidently say that this case would have gotten more attention if 5 white criminals had been accused of similar crimes against 2 black individuals." Moreover, the Knoxville police chief confirmed that there was no evidence suggesting that these crimes were racially motivated. Hello again, true crime fans, we've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Peter Tobin. Peter Britton Tobin was born on August 27, 1946, in Johnstone, Scotland. He was the youngest of 8 children born to Marjorie and Daniel Tobin. From an early age, Peter displayed an impulsive personality, prompting his parents to send him to boarding school in 1953 when he was only 7 years old. However, this did not work, and he was sent to a reformatory. After completing his time there, he moved to Brighton, England. There, Peter began a relationship with Margaret Mount, a young typist who was attracted to his personality. They married in August 1969, but soon, Peter's ruthless, controlling, and abusive personality manifested itself. Not only that, Peter also became involved in criminal activities. A year later, he was convicted and imprisoned in England for theft and counterfeiting. Margaret decided to divorce him in 1973. Peter then married Sylvia Jeffrey, a 30-year-old local nurse, who was also attracted to his charm. That year, they had their first son, Ian, and a year later, a daughter, Claire, who unfortunately died shortly after birth. Sylvia was devastated by the loss of her child, became a victim of Peter's abuse, and decided to leave in 1976, taking their young son with her. Years later, when he was in his 40s, Peter was ready for a new romantic relationship. This time, he chose Kathy Wilson, a sensitive, naive, and impressionable 16-year-old girl. This made it easy for Peter to start a relationship with Kathy. The two moved in together, and soon after, their son, Daniel, was born. They married in 1989 and moved to Scotland. This was a difficult time for Kathy. Her husband was controlling, preventing her from going out and becoming increasingly violent. Eventually, Kathy bravely decided to run away with her son in the late 1990s. Kathy's departure brought out the worst in Peter. After Kathy left, Peter met a gentle girl named Vicky Hamilton. Vicky was born in Scotland in 1976 and was the second child of Michael and Janet Hamilton. She had 3 siblings, Sharon, Lee, and Lindsay. However, arguments arose between Peter and Vicky and they quickly divorced. Vicky, Lee, and Lindsay lived with their mother and moved to South London. Sharon still lives in Bath, but this did not prevent Vicky and Sharon from maintaining the same close relationship as before. The evening of February 10th was cold and snowy. On a hangout with Sharon, Vicky checked her fare and went over the bus route with Sharon. They hugged goodbye. At the bus stop, while eating a bag of chips, Vicky met Peter. He pulled Vicky into his car, raped her, and then killed her. When Vicky failed to visit her mother's house, and there was no news of her, her family began to search for her. They reported her disappearance to the police. As the police investigated the case, Vicky's image became prominent across Scotland, and the search for her became one of the largest in the country's history. The runaway theory was reinforced on February 21, 1991, when Vicky's purse was found near the main bus station in Edinburgh. It was, in fact, a false clue planted by Peter to throw investigators off track. The attempt was successful, sending the investigation off track. Detectives spent 2 months searching London unsuccessfully. It was then revealed that Vicky's mother had died. Over the next 10 years, Vicky's family and townspeople continued to pursue the case, but with more than 7,000 names on file, nearly 4,000 statements taken, some 500 documents and 380 potential physical evidence, all to no avail. The case was eventually dropped. The next young woman to have Peter's misfortune was Dinah McNichol, an Essex native with a brother and 3 sisters. Her father was a jazz musician and her mother had died in a car accident many years earlier. At 18, Dinah was a kind, cheerful girl and a great friend. She had just graduated from high school and had high hopes for the future. She was torn between taking a year off to travel or going to college, but she was undecided. On the first weekend of August 1991, Dinah attended a music festival in Hampshire. There, she met a boy named David Tremlett. They quickly fell in love. On Sunday, August 4th, they spent the night together in a tent. The next day, Dinah helped him take down the tent and they agreed to each hitchhike home. As they were both tired, Peter showed up and offered to give them a ride. David got out of the car first, and Dinah saved Peter's number before parting ways. Alone with the strange driver, the girl was about to face a real nightmare. On Monday, August 5, 1991, he did the same to her as he had done to Vicky. Dinah's scarf became a crime tool. After the crime, Peter withdrew money from Dinah's account at ATMs in Hampshire and Sussex. When Dinah's family saw the withdrawals from her account, they immediately suspected something was wrong. They knew she had carefully saved every penny and planned to use it for travel or education. As the days passed, the family lived in fear and uncertainty, which was the worst thing. Although no one said it, everyone believed that something terrible had happened. If Dinah were still alive, she would have returned home or called to explain her absence. As for Peter, he left Margate without saying goodbye or explaining anything. In 1993, he settled in Hampshire, renting a flat in Leek Park, saying he wanted to be closer to his son. On August 4, 1993, 2 14-year-old girls went to visit Dinah but did not see her. So they asked the neighbors if anyone had seen Dinah, which led to them knocking on Peter's door. Peter invited the 2 girls into his house, ostensibly to wait for Dinah. They saw his friendly 5-year-old son and agreed without suspicion. While the child was asleep, Peter began to torment the 2 girls. He threatened them with a knife and forced them to drink alcohol, then beat and raped them. One of the girls was seriously injured. Fortunately, the child woke up in time and saved them from the same terrible fate as the 2 previous victims. Peter wanted to hide the truth from his son, so he decided to leave the apartment with the child. Before leaving at around 2 a.m., he turned on the gas stove to complete his monstrous plan. However, the 2 girls were lucky to wake up and escape. They went to the police and reported everything that had happened. After that, Peter returned the child to his mother and joined a sect called the Jesus Fellowship under a false name. But the media published his photo, provided by the police, and his face became widely known. With the help of BBC Crime Watch, Peter was finally arrested after 40 days on the run in Brighton. Peter appeared in court on May 18, 1994 and pleaded guilty to sexual assault and indecent assault on 2 young girls. As a result, he was sentenced to 14 years in prison. However, Peter was released in 2014 at the age of 58 without serving the full sentence. After his release, Peter returned to Scotland with the aim of hiding in the same area to avoid being identified as a sex offender. He evaded capture for a long time until 2006. During this time, Peter used a false name and posed as a homeless person. He sought refuge at St. Patrick's Cathedral in Glasgow. Under the name Peter McLaughlin, Peter approached a charity couple from the church group, Dennis and Katie Curran. Katie still felt uneasy about Peter despite his frail appearance. On the other hand, having been raised Catholic, Peter felt comfortable in the church. He begged there, which helped him gain sympathy from the parishioners. This gave Peter the freedom to move around unnoticed and provided him with an ideal hiding place. Here, Peter met Angelica Kluck, a 23-year-old girl from Poland. She came to Scotland in the summer of 2006 to work and pay for her language lessons. Angelica was living in the rectory of St. Patrick's Church and doing cleaning work. Peter took an immediate liking to Angelica and convinced her to help him with various tasks. On Sunday, September 24, 2006, Angelica helped Peter paint a shed. Some parishioners saw them together. But unexpectedly, Peter attacked Angelica at the back of the chapel. Leica Brown, 47, and her husband, Andrew, 46, were at home when they heard a woman screaming through an open window. Leica described the scream as a short, loud sound, like someone being forcibly restrained. The scream made her nervous and she got up from her chair, but when she got to the window, she couldn't see anything. Hours passed and the parishioners noticed that Angelica was no longer there. That was when Dennis and Katie quickly reported the unusual disappearance to the police. The police immediately began investigating and interviewed every member of the community. During these interviews, it was discovered that the last person anyone saw with Angelica was Peter, albeit under the guise of a homeless. He eventually became the prime suspect and the police came to question him, but found no evidence. The investigation continued. Peter knew that it was only a matter of time before they found the body and traced it back to him, so he fled to London. By this time, Detective David Swindle had joined the investigation and began to suspect that this might not just be a disappearance. Everything they found, as well as the testimonies they gathered, made him think that Angelica was unlikely to be found alive. Finally, on September 29, 2006, authorities discovered the body in the chapel. This news shocked British society, especially because of the location chosen by the perpetrator to hide the body. Looking at the injuries sustained by the girl, Detective David suspected that the perpetrator was not acting for the first time. However, there was more news to come. The DNA found at the crime scene and on the victim's body matched the data in the United Kingdom's National Criminal Intelligence Database. That's when they learned that the man they were looking for was Peter Tobin, whose fingerprints were also found at the crime scene. The first step for the authorities was to publish his photograph in the media. His image was also sent nationwide for distribution and the Scottish police contacted the Metropolitan Police, initiating a search throughout the United Kingdom. Meanwhile, Peter, who was in London, tried to hide in a place where he believed he wouldn't be sought. He went to a hospital, pretending to have heart problems, claiming to have chest pain and weakness on the left side of his body. He identified himself as a plumber and called himself James Kelly. He was examined by Dr. Nick Lasso, who conducted several tests. However, something in his demeanor and behavior made the doctor uncomfortable. Initially, he avoided eye contact, which was unusual for a patient. Then, when the tests didn't reveal any physical reasons for the pain he claimed to be experiencing, the doctor became suspicious. His suspicions were confirmed by a nurse who recognized Peter from a photograph circulating in the media. As a result, both the nurse and the doctor contacted the police. This phone call changed the entire dynamic of the investigation. On September 30th, police officer Alan Murray was dispatched to the hospital in London. Peter was taken to a room and Alan went to talk to him. He was immediately arrested. Although initially, he was charged only with a violation of the sex offender registry, this thing allowed the officers to buy time to prepare a criminal case against him. Evidence gathered by the police team led by Detective David led to Peter's trial for the crimes committed against Angelica in late March 2007. Despite all the evidence against him, Peter denied committing any violent acts against the young woman. However, in an attempt to shift blame for the rape, he claimed that they engaged in consensual sexual activity. Peter also denied providing false information to the police and hospital staff. After 6 weeks of legal proceedings, his lies and manipulations proved futile as he was found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 21 years. Detective David and his team suspected that there were more mysteries to Peter's story. During the trial, the detectives further investigated Peter's life, gathered more evidence and built a profile with the cooperation of various law enforcement agencies. To avoid affecting the case involving Angelica, they chose to carry out their work discreetly and carefully. The joint police investigation was called Anagram. Investigators identified links between the disappearances and locations that Peter had visited. The investigation revealed 2 exact links, one in Bathgate and one in Margate. A search was then carried out at Peter's old house on the coast, and they found a knife with traces of DNA hidden in the attic. However, no other findings were made at the location. Investigators then visited the house where he lived in Margate and established that he was a dangerous serial offender. A search of the house revealed a secret grave in the garden that he had created for his son. Investigators dug up a sand pit in the garden and found the body of a woman. Further searches at the same location uncovered another body. A woman's handbag was found at the crime scene and was collected for DNA analysis. As well as identifying the 2 victims, the handbag was also analyzed. Although the handbag clearly contained DNA, there was no match in the National DNA database. However, on June 1, 2007, investigators found a DNA match to Peter's fingerprints. This was a vital lead, and they decided to pursue this line of investigation. On November 14, 2007, the authorities confirmed that one of the bodies was that of Vicky Hamilton, who had gone missing at the age of 15. Her family had waited 16 years for any information about her. They later identified the second body as that of 18-year-old Dinah McNichol, who was hitchhiking home after attending a concert. On September 1, 2008, the Crown Prosecution Service charged Peter with Vicky's murder, leading to his trial. When Vicky's father, Michael, saw Peter, he was restrained by the police, as at that point he just wanted Peter to know that he was there to defend his daughter's honor and remember her. Peter faced sentencing after a month of trial on December 2, 2008, when he was convicted of Vicky's murder and sentenced to life in prison. A year later, in December 2009, Dinah's trial took place. On December 16, due to the defense's failure to provide evidence to exonerate his client, the jury found Peter guilty of Dinah's murder. As a result, he was given an additional life sentence. 5 months before his trial, a report on November 22, 2007, stated that Peter Tobin had been attacked by fellow inmates in prison, but he only suffered minor injuries. During the investigation, Peter Tobin also confessed to a total of 11 murders. Peter died in hospital on October 8, 2022. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Buchanan family. Molly first met Adam Buchanan when she applied for a job as an office manager at his company. At the time, Adam was divorced and raising his son, Nolan, from a previous marriage on his own. The cheerful and outgoing Molly quickly caught Adam's attention. Their mutual interests led to a romance that blossomed into a serious relationship, and eventually, Molly moved in with Adam. Molly became pregnant and their baby was named Gavin. Those who knew the Buchanans described them as a loving family of 4. The patriarch of the family owned a construction company, and they purchased a vacation property in El Dorado County, California, a small cabin on 19 acres in Greenwood. The rustic cabin had no electricity, water, sewer, or gas. Adam, who worked in construction, became actively involved in renovating it, and the family began visiting regularly. On September 13, 2015, at 10 a.m., members of the Garden Valley Fire Department were called to a wildfire in Greenwood Township, located on Highway 193 between Cool and Georgetown. When they arrived, they found that the fire had burned 10 acres of land, and while the cabin was still smoldering, it was completely destroyed. Fire department personnel found charred remains in the ashes. The fire scene was still intact, and at 11 a.m., firefighters contacted the El Dorado County Sheriff's Office. At the time, no one understood the severity of the situation. Firefighters suspected that the victim of the wildfire was a pet trapped inside the house. When they arrived, the rest of the house was still smoldering, making it impossible to check inside. They had to wait for the fire to go out and the temperature to drop. While investigating the house, police officers detected an odor similar to that of burning flesh. Police later found a human skull and a charred torso, indicating that a tragedy had occurred. Police called for backup. Officers from the sheriff's office arrived to thoroughly investigate the scene. It became clear that the small, isolated cabin was not the owner's primary residence, but rather a vacation home. A Dodge pickup truck and trailer were discovered on a plot of land near the cabin. Police obtained the license plate number to identify the owner, who may have been affected by the wildfire. It was quickly determined that the truck and trailer belonged to Buchanan Construction, owned by Adam Buchanan. He lived approximately 160 miles away, in Bonita, California. Police were unsure whether the person inside was Adam Buchanan or someone else. The name of the company owner provided police with their first lead into the investigation. The Bonita police were tasked with checking on the welfare of all members of the Buchanan family. They arrived at the address and parked in the Buchanan driveway, where they saw a white Ford pickup truck. When the officers knocked on the door, Nolan, Adam's 16-year-old son from his first marriage, answered. He was surprised to see the officers in uniform and asked why they were there. In order to avoid alarming anyone in the house, the officers decided to first determine who was inside. Nolan explained that his father, Adam, had gone away for the weekend to their estate, 160 miles away, with Molly and their 8-year-old son, Gavin, and they were expected back that evening. According to Nolan, his father had left him in charge of the house. Police did not yet have enough evidence to confirm that the remains found in the cabin were those of the Buchanans, but the information they gathered, along with the discovery of what they believed to be 2 human remains on the evening of September 13th, was enough to report the family missing from the El Dorado County fire. The following day, September 14th, El Dorado County Police went to the Nolan home to conduct more in-depth interviews and identify the victims of the fire. At the home, officers spoke with Adam's parents, Howard and Susan Buchanan. They mentioned that their son, the owner of the burned-out cabin, had been coming to the cabin to do repairs himself. The parents were very concerned because they had not been able to contact their son or daughter-in-law until that time. From their statements, officers learned that the home was equipped with a generator, but that there was no electricity at the time of the incident. There were also gas tanks inside. This led to 2 possible explanations: the fire could have been accidental or intentional. By September 15th, the fire had cooled, allowing police to collect evidence, including debris from a nearby fire pit. Detective James Peterson of the El Dorado County Sheriff's Office reported finding new remains, which changed the direction of the investigation. Police discovered a skull fragment with a bullet hole. At that point, it was clear that a homicide had occurred, and according to the sheriff, it could no longer be considered an accidental fire. The remains were collected and sent for DNA testing. In the first set of remains, a bullet was found lodged in the victim's thigh. The bullet-riddled skull was identified as that of a child. There was now no doubt that the fire had been used to cover up the crime. Police initially focused on whether anyone in his profession might have had a grudge against him. They also looked into Molly's life to see if she had any enemies who might have committed the crime. When those leads proved fruitless, police began looking into Molly and Adam's marital problems, which uncovered more problems. Police discovered that Molly and Adam's relationship had deteriorated significantly over time and that at the time of the murders, they had been sleeping in separate rooms for some time. A diary belonging to Molly detailed instances of abuse by Adam. Witnesses reported that Adam had not only abused Molly, but also abused children. Molly's mother, Susie Slanker, expressed to police that she feared that the couple might seriously harm each other during their arguments. Although Molly did not end her relationship with Adam, she would occasionally leave with her son to stay at her parents' house, returning after a few days until the next argument. It was also revealed that the couple enjoyed hunting in the area near their vacation home. Since both were armed, the police hypothesized that during an argument, one of them picked up a gun and shot the other, then, realizing the seriousness of the situation, committed suicide. There was a notable contradiction. If the tragedy had been caused by a conflict between husband and wife, there should have been a weapon found near one of them. However, no weapon was found. The police thought that the weapon might have been destroyed in the fire, making identification more difficult. For 5 days, members of the forensic team meticulously sifted through the ashes of the house. Despite a thorough search, they did not find any weapons. At this point, the medical examiner confirmed that the DNA found on the bodies belonged to Adam Buchanan, Molly McAfee, and their 8-year-old son Gavin. All 3 victims had suffered gunshot wounds prior to the fire, and the angle of the shot made it unlikely that they had committed suicide. The absence of a gun suggested that a 4th person had been present in the home who had shot the Buchanans, prompting a complete reopening of the investigation. Police turned to the victim's 16-year-old son, Nolan. He told police that the family had driven away in an old Dodge truck. Nolan explained that his father had chosen to use the company truck instead of their personal Ford, which was parked in the driveway, because he had loaded it with rocks for landscaping near their country cabin. The truck was later found near the burned-out cabin. When asked why Nolan did not go on vacation with his relatives, he explained, as he had in his first interview, that he needed to take care of the house and garden while his father and stepmother were away. Nolan also mentioned that a neighbor was illegally planting trees on the edge of the Buchanan property, which led to frequent arguments between his father and the neighbor. His father would often demand that the neighbor stop planting trees and threaten to call the police. Nolan spoke about the difficulties of the family business, revealing that the company was facing serious financial problems. The company was downsizing, with only 5 employees remaining. According to his father, debts were mounting rapidly. The investigation identified a suspect, a neighbor. The main problem was that no one could identify which neighbors were involved. The police went door to door, interviewing homeowners in the area. This approach paid off when they found a man who confirmed that he had argued with Adam about growing an illegal crop. However, he claimed that the disagreement ended after a tense conversation and that he had an alibi. After confirming the neighbor's alibi, the police investigated the family's financial situation, as their business was struggling. On September 18th, police went to Adam's company to talk to the employees. Nolan's words were correct. The company was in dire straits, facing bankruptcy with debts exceeding $30,000. As a result, several employees were fired. Several of these former employees were very unhappy about being fired, making them potential suspects in the case. This aspect provided an important lead for the police. Over the weekend, the local high school held a community cleanup day. Students worked to clear debris from a park located about a mile from Adam's construction company. During the cleanup on September 19th, they discovered a small wallet containing Molly McAfee and Adam Buchanan's wallets and identification cards, hidden under one of the bushes. There was also a .22 caliber rifle nearby. Police were dispatched to the scene immediately. The county sheriff's office has since developed a new theory. the suspect may have used the rifle to kill the Buchanans and, to conceal the crime, remove their identification from the scene. This finding is significant because it suggests that someone traveled from Bonita to Greenwood to kill the family and then returned to Bonita to dispose of the evidence and the weapon. This suspect is likely a Bonita resident. The location of the evidence near Buchanan Construction supports the idea that the boss was killed by a disgruntled employee. Police have sent the gun and bag of documents for analysis and are seeking a search warrant for the company's records and premises. During their search, police accessed a video surveillance camera located on the company's premises. Fortunately, the camera focused on the parking lot, not the company's premises. Surveillance footage showed the family had left town on Friday, so police reviewed footage from that day. They were surprised to see that Adam had hooked up a trailer full of rocks to a Ford F-150, not a Dodge truck as Nolan had claimed. Police discovered that Nolan had deliberately interfered with the investigation. If the white Ford had pulled the rock trailer to the cabin, then someone must have driven it back and parked it in the Buchanan family's driveway. Police decided to interview Nolan again. Nolan repeated his account of the weekend, where he had been, and who he had met, but this time they also asked him about the movie he had seen at the theater and how he had paid for his shopping at the mall. When asked how he paid for dessert on their date, Nolan said he used his father's credit card. Police then obtained a search warrant for Buchanan's Bonita home, inspected his vehicles and reviewed his financial records. They found a Ford parked in the driveway, which they carefully inspected. They noticed red dirt on the tires, which matched the dirt found in Greenwood. If the Ford had made the trip the previous weekend or earlier, some dirt might have remained. Unfortunately, the fire destroyed the tire tracks near the cabin, but the accumulation of dirt suggested the car may have been in Greenwood recently. Officers tracked the bank card transactions and discovered that Adam Buchanan used his credit card at Taco Bell on Friday, September 11th, while traveling to Greenwood. Nolan, on the other hand, claimed he was home, not with his parents, and had a credit card with him. Police went to the diner and reviewed security footage, confirming their suspicions. A white Ford was seen instead of a truck. When they searched the Ford, they found a Taco Bell receipt from September 11th showing 4 drinks purchased, not 3. Additionally, evidence at the scene of the fire showed the presence of 4 drink cups, confirming that Nolan had been in the car. The next credit card transaction occurred on Saturday, September 12th, at the Valencia Club Bar in Pennon, about 30 minutes from the cabin. Adam's parents had alerted detectives to the bar, saying their son and daughter-in-law often went there after working on renovating the cabin. Security cameras recorded the moment the couple left the bar, and highway traffic cameras tracked their route. A Ford F-150 was seen heading toward the Buchanan cabin at 2:30 a.m. on the day of the fire, and then driving in the opposite direction at 3:30 a.m. In the first instance, cameras captured Adam and Molly in the car. In the second, only Nolan was recorded. Hours later, on the morning of Sunday, September 13th, Adam's credit card was used at 3 locations owned by Bonita, Starbucks, McDonald's, and a gas station. The bank confirmed to police that Buchanan had only one bank card. This information contradicted Nolan's accounts. At this time, forensic results showed that Nolan's fingerprints were found on the gun. He was arrested in the classroom. Nolan Buchanan pleaded not guilty to the charges against him and attempted to twist the story by claiming that his father had shot his family. He said his father had pointed a gun at him, and in self-defense he took the weapon away, accidentally shooting his father. Nolan maintained that it was self-defense, claiming that the fire and his subsequent lies were due to his panic and extreme fear. He explained that he had doused the house with gasoline and set it on fire to cover it up. The defense repeatedly pointed to Adam's abusive behavior toward his son and other family members to the jury. The medical examiner raised doubts about the verdict. noting that the gunshot wound to Gavin's skull indicated it was fired at a nearly 90 degrees angle. Nolan, meanwhile, claimed that he and his brother's beds were next to each other and that they were both awakened by noises and screams. At that point, Nolan allegedly saw someone enter the bedroom and shoot Gavin. The shooter then pointed the rifle at Nolan, who was able to push the attacker away. According to this account, the shot would have come from about a 45 degrees angle, which is inconsistent with forensic evidence. The prosecution believes Nolan shot his younger brother Gavin while they were home alone, as their parents were at a bar. After waiting for their father and stepmother to return, Nolan shot them as well. The position of the bodies suggested that Adam was killed first, followed by Molly. Nolan then took his rifle, his parents' papers, poured gasoline over the bodies, and set the house on fire. He then went home, met his girlfriend, and spent the day with her to establish his alibi. On July 13, 2018, a jury convicted Nolan Buchanan of 3 counts of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to 150 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Amy Widener. Amy Widener, born in 1973, is the second of 4 children. Her siblings include an older brother, John Paul, and 2 younger sisters, Tiny and Cassie, who are 1 and 4 years younger than Amy. After their parents divorced, Gloria, the children's mother, took on the responsibility of raising the children herself. As their father played no role in raising them, the family lived in a house in Indianapolis, with Amy helping her mother with various household chores, including cooking, cleaning, and caring for her younger sisters. Amy, a bright and cheerful 14-year-old girl, had big dreams of becoming a teacher. However, her life took an unexpected turn when she became pregnant. Afraid to tell her mother, she hid her pregnancy by wearing baggy clothes for over 5 months. As her belly grew, it became harder to hide it, and eventually, her family discovered her secret when she was nearly 6 months pregnant. Gathering all her courage, Amy told her mother, Gloria, and burst into tears. Amy begged her mother not to hate her, but Gloria, though shocked, offered words of comfort and encouragement. Gloria recalls feeling stunned, thinking that this was the worst thing that could happen in her life. However, she had no idea of the even more heartbreaking events that were about to happen. The father of Amy's child was 20-year-old Tony Abercrombie, a friend of her brother. What their family did not know was that Amy and Tony had a secret relationship, with only the 2 of them knowing about their intimacy. After learning of her daughter's pregnancy, Gloria took control and forbade Amy from seeing Tony. On October 25, 1987, Amy gave birth to a daughter named Emily. Amy started school again just 6 days after giving birth. Her mother, Gloria, strongly supported Amy's return to school by taking care of Emily, allowing Amy to focus on her studies. Gloria also made sure that Amy had time to socialize with friends and live a normal teenage life. As a new mother, Amy remained dedicated to her studies, impressing her teachers with her perseverance. Despite juggling the demands of motherhood, Amy excelled in her studies, continuing to receive praise from her teachers. Amy's family adapted to the new addition, with everyone sharing the care of Emily. Over time, life began to fall into a positive pattern, with Amy overcoming her difficulties. Just when things seemed to be going smoothly, a sudden change turned everything upside down. On November 13, 1989, 16-year-old Amy woke up with a severe sore throat and decided to stay home from school, despite her mother, Gloria, offering to take Emily to a nanny. She kept her 2-year-old daughter, Emily, with her. After breakfast together, Gloria went to work, and Amy's siblings went to school, leaving Amy and Emily alone at home. Gloria tried to contact Amy by phone at 9:30 a.m. but received no response. When she called again a few hours later and still had not heard anything, Gloria became worried. She asked a nearby neighbor to stop by and check on them. The neighbor found the house quiet and unresponsive, prompting Gloria to leave work immediately and go home. When she arrived, she found Emily sitting on the stairs. Gloria called Amy, but received no answer, so she went upstairs. The scene in Amy's bedroom was tragic and shocking. Amy lay motionless and naked on the bed, surrounded by bloodstains. When Gloria realized the urgency of the situation, she quickly called 911. The police arrived and carefully searched Amy's house. At first, they thought someone had tried to break in because several items were missing, including stereo equipment and a graphic equalizer that belonged to Amy's brother, John Paul. Another item missing was a piggy bank from Amy's room, a simple glass jar with about $50 in savings for school. The police did not find any signs of forced entry. It is likely that the perpetrator entered through an unlocked back door or the front door, which Amy may have opened herself. In Amy's room, the police found key evidence, a bloody handprint on the wall and several strands of hair, likely belonging to the attacker. The medical examiner determined that Amy had been hit in the head with a sharp object, sexually assaulted, and then strangled. Amy's 2-year-old daughter, Emily, may have witnessed these events. Fortunately, Emily was found unharmed. Due to Emily's young age, the police attempted to communicate with her and gather any information she had. To create a more comfortable environment, they used finger puppets to gently question Emily about the events. During the interaction, Emily mentioned that her mother seemed very angry that day. Unfortunately, Emily did not provide any further details. To aid in their investigation, the police collected evidence, including a section of the wall with the attacker's bloody handprint, as well as the victim's clothing and bedding at the crime scene. During the investigation of Amy's case, the police spoke to her family, friends, and neighbors to gather information. One of the people they interviewed was Amy's 17-year-old brother, John Paul. Police initially suspected him, but he had an alibi and no evidence linking him to the case. Another person of interest was Tony Abercrombie, Amy's ex-boyfriend and the father of her child. He denied any involvement in her murder and expressed his deep feelings for Amy. Tony had a credible alibi at the time of the murder. Police also investigated Troy Jackson, who lived next door to Amy. Although he claimed he had nothing to do with the murder, he knew that a stereo system had been stolen on the day of the murder. Troy had no bruises or scratches on his hands, and a hair sample did not match the hair found at the crime scene. Troy also passed a lie detector test, which eventually cleared him as a suspect. Police expanded their investigation by talking to other acquaintances, neighbors, and classmates of Amy. They collected fingerprints and hair samples from these people, but no evidence pointed to any of them. A large crowd attended Amy Widener's funeral, and police attended the funeral, observing the proceedings and looking for potential clues in the case. Months passed after Amy's death, and the police still had no leads on any suspects. Gloria Widener, Amy's mother, adopted her niece Emily. As the family grieved their loss, Gloria feared for their safety, as the killer had not been caught. Fearing for her children's safety, she considered moving to a new home, but financial constraints made this impossible, forcing them to face their fears in their current home. Amy's friends were now haunted by the fear that they might be the attacker's next target. To feel safer, many of them asked their parents to take precautions and improve the security of their homes. Some even went so far as to board up their windows to protect against potential attacks. One day, when Gloria returned home after a normal day, she expected to find her daughters home from school. However, she was met with an eerie silence when she entered the house. The house was eerily empty, but her daughters' shoes were in their usual place near the door. Horrifying thoughts filled Gloria's mind as she climbed the stairs, fearing another disaster. She stood frozen in her bedroom doorway, Gloria took a deep breath and pushed the door open, finding her children simply asleep, and she breathed a sigh of relief. Occasionally, the police would visit Amy's family, inadvertently forcing them to relive the pain of that terrible day. The constant reminders of the past eventually became unbearable for Gloria. All she wanted was for the police to leave her family alone and stop stirring up memories that would never bring Amy back. In 1989, Amy was murdered and the case went cold. 13 years later, a shocking development occurred when a 29-year-old man contacted the Indianapolis Police Department claiming that he had had a dream in which Amy provided information about her death. Although he provided details about the murder, most of the information was released in news reports. Police investigated the man, who was 16 at the time of the incident and lived across the street from Amy's house. His fingerprints and DNA were tested for any potential connection, but no match was found, leading to his release. Although his call did not contribute significant evidence, it prompted police to re-examine the unsolved case. In 2002, the investigation resumed, focusing on some of Amy's friends and acquaintances. Despite renewed efforts, the investigation once again hit a dead end, leaving the case unsolved. 8 years later, a Facebook group called Remembering Amy was created by her friends, sparking renewed interest in solving the case. A police officer, unfamiliar with Facebook, asked his colleague, Officer Bill Carter, to help him print out information from a Facebook group related to a cold case. Although Bill specializes in crimes other than homicide, reviewing the details of the case piqued his interest in Amy's murder. In his spare time, he began to explore the case files. Bill scrutinized the 2-decade-old case, re-examining every detail in the file, re-evaluating the evidence, and reviewing Amy's school records from the day of the murder. He also looked at the list of people who had attended Amy's funeral. By entering the case information into the database, Bill found some overlooked leads. Among them were several friends of Amy's brother who had never been questioned by the police and had not provided DNA samples. In 2011, Officer Bill expanded his investigation by contacting Amy's family and friends, asking for potential leads and the names of people who might have information about the case. As part of his new approach, he also began collecting DNA samples from people who had not previously been considered during the initial investigation. This effort complemented the neighborhood survey conducted after the crime, where police recorded the names of residents who lived near Amy's home. Bill reviewed the case file and returned to the area to determine if any of the original residents still lived nearby. His investigation led him to a woman who was a neighbor and friend of Amy's. The woman tried to recall the names of the boys Amy had befriended, and while she mentioned some names that the police knew, she also mentioned an unfamiliar name, Rodney Dank. In 2012, Bill received permission from the Cold Case Unit to officially take over the Amy case. His first step was to locate Rodney Dank to determine if he was a potential suspect. Amy's family was familiar with Rodney, as he was friends with Amy's brother, John Paul. They spent time together doing activities like biking and fishing. Bill asked John Paul about Rodney and learned that Rodney was a quiet, reserved person who kept to himself and did not arouse any suspicion. To gather more information, Bill went to the home of Rodney Dank, 40, who lived with his mother near Amy's family. Rodney worked at an auto parts store and had been divorced for some time, with an adult son whom he rarely saw. When Bill arrived at Rodney's home, his mother answered and told the police that Rodney was at work. Bill left his business card, asking Rodney to call him as soon as he returned. Rodney called Bill that evening and the police asked to meet with him to discuss Amy's murder. Rodney agreed and allowed Bill to come to his home. However, when Bill returned to Rodney's home, he was not there. Bill decided to run a background check on Rodney and discovered that Rodney had been convicted of assault in 1991 and burglary in 1997. The police also compared Rodney's fingerprints, which were already in the system, to the fingerprints found at Amy's house during the initial investigation. The test was conducted to determine if Rodney was involved in the case. When the results came back, they discovered that Rodney's fingerprints matched the bloody fingerprints found at the crime scene. After 23 years, Rodney was identified as the killer, but he had disappeared from the house. The police launched an extensive search. They tracked Rodney's credit card activity, which showed a rental car with an OnStar tracking system. The police located the car in Indianapolis, where Rodney was hiding at a friend's house. When surrounded by police, Rodney brandished a knife and claimed his innocence, injuring himself. He attempted to attack the police but was subdued with a taser, handcuffed, and taken to hospital. During a 2-day hospital interrogation that was captured on camera, Rodney confessed to Amy's murder. He said his original intention was to rob, not anticipating Amy's presence due to her illness. Rodney described entering the house through a sliding glass door, where he was suddenly confronted by a panicked Amy. In his panic, he grabbed the nearest object and hit Amy in the head, killing her. As he recounted the events of the next 2 days, Rodney repeatedly mentioned that his memory of the incident was hazy, blaming the 23 years that had passed since the crime. Rodney's account of his actions was inconsistent, and he initially mentioned visiting Amy's house with someone called Bag. However, he could not recall many details about this person, including their appearance. When asked about Emily, Rodney stated that he did not see her during the incident and did not know that she was in the house or that she had called for help. Throughout the interrogation, Rodney remained calm. Rodney's DNA was collected and matched with semen found on Amy's bedsheets and blankets in 1989. Fingerprints and semen found at the crime scene were both confirmed to be Rodney's, with no indication that anyone else was involved. When Rodney was revealed as the killer, Amy's family was shocked. They were baffled how Rodney, who was quiet and unassuming, could have committed such a crime. Rodney was friends with Amy's brother John Paul and often visited their home, which was across the street from his. Even more remarkable was that Rodney attended Amy's funeral, where he mourned her death and offered his condolences to her mother, Gloria. Police Bill later found Rodney's signature in Amy's funeral book, a detail that had previously been overlooked. Reinvestigating the case led Bill to a crucial discovery. Rodney's name was first mentioned by Tony, Amy's ex-boyfriend and Emily's biological father, in 2003. Tony revealed that Rodney had frequently visited Amy's family home. Bill realized that Rodney had somehow escaped notice in 1989 and had never been suspected or questioned at the time. Further investigation into Rodney's background in 2012 uncovered a disturbing fact. His biological son, Dylan, was in prison for a crime committed in 2009. Dylan was 16 when he killed his biological mother, Mary McHenry. He claimed that he had acted in response to her abuse, using a baseball bat to inflict the fatal wounds. Mary died of her injuries. Dylan turned 17 just days after the incident, leaving behind a tragic and heartbreaking case. Despite being largely absent from Dylan's life due to his early divorce from Mary McHenry, Rodney attended Dylan's trial in 2009, opting for a plea deal that resulted in a 20-year prison sentence. By the time of his scheduled release in 2029, Dylan will be 37. Rodney, on the other hand, initially insisted that he had an accomplice in Amy's murder, a man he knew as Bag. However, in June 2013, just 10 days before his trial was due to begin, Rodney, then 42, recanted his earlier confession, admitting that he had acted alone in Amy's murder. Rodney's sudden confession, combined with the substantial evidence against him, led to his 65-year prison sentence in 2013. Amy's family held a meeting with Detective Bill Carter after Amy's case was solved. To mark the 24th anniversary of her death, they released 24 balloons into the air, expressing their gratitude for Detective Bill's crucial role in solving the case. The family thanked him for his efforts, especially for identifying Rodney as the killer after just 12 days of investigation. Police officer Bill Carter received a prestigious award from the Indianapolis Police Department in January 2014. Although he was offered a position in the Homicide Bureau, he chose to stay in his current position. Years later, Amy's daughter, Emily, has grown up. She graduated from her mother's alma mater and then went to college, looking for new opportunities. Eventually, Emily moved from Indianapolis to California. Gloria still lives in the house where her daughter, Amy, tragically died. She has kept Amy's room as a memory of her, with photos still on display. Now, the room is also where Gloria's grandchildren play when they visit for the holidays, bringing joy and new life to a space once filled with sadness and loss. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Jason Corbett. Jason Corbett, a 39-year-old Irish businessman, Jason has a warm, friendly personality. Born in Limerick, Ireland, Jason has a twin brother named Wayne and an older sister named Tracy. He married Margaret Fitzpatrick in 2003 when he was 27. They later welcomed 2 children, a son named Jack and a daughter named Sarah, whom they loved dearly. Jason's family seemed to be living a happy life in Ireland, but this happiness was short-lived. Tragedy struck in 2006, shortly after Sarah was born. Margaret suffered a severe asthma attack one night, waking Jason up because she was having trouble breathing. Jason immediately tried to help her by giving her medication and using her inhaler, but her condition quickly worsened. In a panic, Jason called an ambulance, but unfortunately, Margaret died on the way to the hospital. Jason Corbett was the director of a small packaging company in Ireland when he lost his wife, leaving him to raise his 2-year-old son and 3-month-old daughter alone. His friends witnessed his deep sadness and struggled to cope with the loss. A year after his wife's death, Jason was looking for a nanny and housekeeper to care for his children. This led him to Molly Martins, a 25-year-old American woman. In March 2008, Molly moved from the United States to Ireland to take up a nanny job. A friend of Jason's accompanied him to the airport to pick Molly up. The friend immediately became concerned that Molly might not be suitable for the job. Molly's youthful appearance, flashy style, and heavy makeup aroused suspicion. With her bright jacket, cowboy boots, curly hair, and heavy makeup, Molly looks more like a stage performer than a responsible nanny and maid. Molly was born and raised in Knoxville, Tennessee. After attending Clemson University for a while, she dropped out and decided to start a new life in Ireland. There, she worked as a nanny for Jason's family, taking care of his 2 children, Jack and Sarah. Molly immediately took to the children, showing them care and concern. Jason's friends noticed a significant change in him. He seemed to be coming back to life after a period of grief. As Molly and Jason's relationship deepened, love blossomed and they began dating. The family of 4 went on vacations together, which brought them closer together. They began to plan for their future as a family. 2 years later, on Valentine's Day 2010, Jason took Molly to a coffee shop, where he proposed to her with a ring. Overjoyed, Molly immediately began planning their wedding in the United States. She also convinced Jason to leave Ireland and move to the United States with her, and he agreed. In 2011, Jason sold his house, moved to the United States for work, and the family settled in Davidson County, North Carolina. The couple married in a beautiful ceremony attended by friends and family from both the United States and Ireland. After the wedding, Molly worked as a swimming instructor. But her main focus was raising Jack and Sarah. Jason, on the other hand, worked as a manager in the United States. At first, their life seemed perfect, but as time went on, their marriage began to fall apart. On August 1, 2015, Molly's parents, Tom and Sharon Martins, visited Jason's family home, where he greeted them at the entrance and helped them with their luggage. Tom had brought a gift for Jason's son, Jack, a baseball bat, but Jack was out with friends at the time. Instead, Jason, Molly, her parents, and Sarah had dinner together, eating pizza. Jack returned home late that night, but Tom decided to wait until the next morning to give him the baseball bat. After 11 p.m., the family went to bed. Molly and Jason were in the master bedroom on the first floor, while their children, Jack and Sarah, were in nearby rooms. Molly's parents were upstairs in the living room. Hours later, at 3 a.m., Molly's father, Tom, called 911 in a panic. He claimed that Jason had attacked his daughter, Molly, and in response, Tom had hit Jason with a baseball bat. Jason was now unconscious and bleeding. During the call, Tom expressed his fear that Jason's severe head injuries could be fatal and urgently requested an ambulance to their location. Tom asked the 911 operator for help, and she instructed Tom and Molly to perform CPR to try to revive Jason until paramedics arrived. When the police and ambulance arrived, they found Molly in the yard near a car, looking distressed and shocked but not crying. Inside the house, they discovered Jason Corbett's body in the master bedroom, surrounded by blood splattered on the bed, walls, and floor. Tom and Molly both had blood on their clothes. A baseball bat and a large pebble with blood on them were found near Jason, along with an overturned lamp. Jack and Sarah had been sleeping in their room during the incident. At the police station, Tom Martins, 66, a 30-year veteran of the FBI, stated that his son-in-law was mentally unstable and had been abusing his daughter. According to Tom, Jason had been drunk that night. Everyone had gone to bed, but Tom was awakened in the middle of the night by screams and loud voices coming from downstairs. He quickly got out of bed, grabbed a baseball bat, and ran down the stairs. When Tom entered the master bedroom, he found Jason strangling Molly with both hands. Tom yelled, "Let her go." In response, Jason turned to him and said, "I'm going to kill her." Tom and Molly did not deny their involvement in Jason's death but claimed they had acted in self-defense. Tom immediately felt the need to protect himself and those around him. He swung the baseball bat at Jason, but the blow seemed to have no effect. When Jason tried to drag Molly into the bathroom, Tom intervened, trying to stop him. The situation worsened when Jason pushed Tom, causing him to fall and his glasses to fly off. At this point, Tom felt his life was in danger. Jason then spotted the baseball bat on the floor and reached for it. Molly quickly responded by grabbing a rock and hitting Jason in the head, yelling, "Don't touch my dad," as she did so. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Tom picked up the baseball bat and repeatedly hit Jason until he fell to the floor. Molly, 32, provided a consistent account of events during her interview. She explained that her daughter Sarah woke up with a nightmare that night, which caused Jason to become angry and attack her. Jason allegedly began strangling Molly, threatening to kill her, and her father intervened to protect her. In order to protect her father, Molly claimed to have hit Jason on the head with a heavy rock. When asked where she got the rock, Molly replied that she had placed it on her bedside table. The rock had originally been used for drawing pictures with children as part of a gardening project, but Molly could not remember exactly how many times she had hit Jason, describing the incident as a desperate fight for her life. During her interview, Molly told police that she was still in pain from the alleged strangling incident. Photos of Molly, which showed a red mark in the middle of her neck, were compared to photos taken of her when she was arrested. However, the comparison did not reveal any red marks on her neck at the time of her arrest. Molly later admitted that the fight with her husband had actually occurred the day before the tragedy, in which Jason had grabbed her arm and neck. During questioning, she repeatedly complained of a sore throat. Both Molly and her father, Tom, testified that Jason had abused his wife, but Jason's family disputed these claims. Jason's sister, Tracy, noticed that Molly was controlling of Jason, often becoming upset if things did not go her way. She also noticed that Molly did not want to socialize with Jason's family members when they visited. Additionally, one of Molly's friends shared a disturbing claim that Molly had claimed to be friends with Jason's first wife, Margaret, until her death. However, this contradicted the family's account, as they knew Margaret had died of an asthma attack, not cancer. Despite Jason's relatives' warnings and attempts to intervene about Molly's unusual behavior, the wedding still takes place, marking the beginning of a complicated and troubled marriage. Over time, Molly's behavior began to raise concerns. Jason noticed a major change in her personality and suspected that she might have mental health issues. She was initially kind and loving, but now seemed manipulative and controlling. This worried Jason and led to more problems in their relationship. Molly began distancing herself from Jason's family by cutting her phone calls to just seconds. Before her death, Jason took steps to protect his children, Jack and Sarah. He named his sister, Tracy, as their legal guardian in case anything happened to him. Tracy knew that if Jason died, Molly would have custody of the children. After Jason's death, Tracy traveled to North Carolina to file for custody, preparing for a legal battle with Molly. During her troubled marriage to Jason, Molly consulted with an attorney to understand her rights to Jason's children in the event of a divorce. The lawyer suggested that she record their arguments and gather evidence that could be used against Jason. As a result, Molly began secretly recording their conversations. In these recordings, Molly appeared unresponsive, often ignoring Jason's repeated questions as his voice grew louder. After Jason's death, Molly confided in a close friend about her marital problems, describing Jason as controlling and abusive. She accused him of forcing her to have sex, verbally abusing her, and becoming increasingly aggressive toward her over time. Despite this, Molly never reported Jason's behavior to the police. For days after Jason's death, his 10-year-old son Jack and 8-year-old daughter Sarah were interviewed by a child welfare specialist. During the conversation, they shared their thoughts about their parents' relationship. The children described seeing their mother, Molly, being careful not to wake their father, Jason, for fear of him getting angry. Jack described a pebble on his parents' bedside table, explaining that they had brought it in because it was raining and planned to decorate it later. Both Jack and Sarah described witnessing arguments between them. According to the children, their father, Jason, often initiated these arguments, which included hitting, pushing, and swearing at his mother, Molly, over trivial matters. Jason's autopsy report found that he died of traumatic brain injury. He had suffered approximately 12 severe blows to the head with a baseball bat and a rock, all concentrated in the same area. The injuries were so severe that his scalp was torn away from his skull and his skull was fractured. A toxicology report found that Jason's blood alcohol level was slightly higher than normal at the time of his death. He also had traces of trazodone, an antidepressant commonly prescribed to treat insomnia, in his body. Jason was buried in his hometown of Limerick, Ireland, next to his first wife, Margaret. After Jason's death, his sister, Tracy, took their children, Jack and Sarah, to Ireland, which left Molly shocked and heartbroken. She tried to contact Jack and Sarah by phone and social media. Molly and Tom claimed they acted in self-defense against Jason, but the investigation into his death continues. Tracy has another theory. She thinks Molly killed Jason because he planned to leave her and take their children. Tracy believes that Jason told Molly about his decision on the night of the incident, and Molly, afraid of being alone, reacted violently. In Ireland, Jack and Sarah slowly adjust to their new lives. 9 months after their father's death, they revealed that they were forced to lie about domestic violence. They admit that Molly made up stories about their father's violent behavior, threatening to cut them off if they did not comply. The children clarify that their father had never abused Molly, contrary to what they had initially said. During the investigation, Molly's past relationship with her ex-husband Keith Megan came to light. Keith shared some revealing details about Molly's past. The two met on a dating website and quickly fell in love, moving in together just 6 weeks later. Keith described Molly as independent, fun-loving, carefree and unconventional. However, she eventually confided in him about her struggles with bipolar disorder. Keith was not overly concerned by the revelation, as Molly was on medication and appeared to be fine, apart from occasional changes in her behavior when she missed a dose. These changes did not manifest as violence or outbursts, but rather as clingy behavior during arguments, such as refusing to let Keith leave. Additionally, Molly would often spend hours in the bath, followed by periods of sitting on the cold floor and crying. Despite the difficulties they faced, Keith and Molly continued their life together and decided not to have children at that time. However, Molly soon revealed that she was pregnant, which took Keith by surprise. As the sole breadwinner, Keith was struggling financially and did not feel ready to become a father. Keith eventually proposed to Molly and she happily accepted, but due to her health problems, Molly continued to take prescription medication, including antidepressants, sometimes up to 16 pills a day. This caused Keith to worry about the effects of the medication on their unborn child. In a tragic turn of events, Molly had a dream that she had lost her baby, and the next day the hospital confirmed that the fetus had died. The loss put further strain on their relationship. Molly fell into a state of grief and was diagnosed with major depression. Her parents began to view Keith negatively, seeing him as the cause of Molly's problems. Molly planned to leave Keith in the United States to find work as a nanny for the family in Europe. In March 2008, she packed her things and moved out of the apartment they were sharing. 10 days later, she called Keith, telling him that she was in Ireland, had found a job, and was doing well. This was the last time they spoke. Years later, in October 2015, Keith received an email from a police officer in North Carolina revealing that Molly had kept her relationship with Keith and her move to Europe a secret. The email informed Keith that Molly's new husband, Jason Corbett, had been murdered. When Keith watched an interview with Molly and her father, Tom, they described Jason as a cruel person, but Keith did not believe their story. He thought their feelings seemed fake. In January 2016, Tom and Molly were charged with second-degree murder in Jason's death. At their trial in July 2017, Tom and Molly claimed they had acted in self-defense when they killed Jason. Tom said he had tried everything he could to keep himself and Molly safe. Tom admitted to beating Jason with a baseball bat, only stopping when he was sure Jason was no longer a threat. However, the prosecution argued that the severity of the attack showed a deep hatred for Jason rather than self-defense. Analysis of the bloodstains showed that some of the blows were delivered when Jason's head was between 30 and 50 centimeters above the ground, suggesting that Tom continued to attack even after Jason was no longer a threat. The presence of stains on Molly's nightgown near the area where Jason was struck suggests that she was nearby during the attack. During the trial, Lieutenant Frank Young testified about the injuries he observed on Tom and Molly on the night of the incident. He stated that Molly had self-inflicted wounds to her neck, telling her to stop while he was taking notes on her injuries. Other than some dried blood on her face and hair, Lieutenant Young found no other injuries on Molly. Tom also had no injuries, only blood on his watch and under his fingernails. Notably, his glasses were not broken. Paramedic Amanda Hackworth also took the stand and described what she found when she arrived at the scene. When she examined Jason's body, she found that his torso was cold to the touch and had patches of dried blood. This contradicts Molly's statement that they called 911 immediately after Jason became unconscious. The police investigation discovered that Jason had a life insurance policy, with Molly listed as the beneficiary. Furthermore, it was revealed that Jason had financially supported Molly's parents. A neighbor of Jason's family testified at the trial. He recalled spending an evening with Jason from 3:30 p.m. to 8:30 p.m., drinking beer together. According to the neighbor, Jason seemed very relaxed at the time. The neighbor also witnessed Tom and his wife arriving at Jason's house and noted that Jason warmly welcomed them and helped them carry heavy luggage into the house. After 9 days of witness testimony, listening to arguments, and viewing haunting crime scene photos, the jury reached a verdict within 3 hours. The court found Molly Corbett and her father, Tom Martins, guilty of second-degree murder. Molly was sentenced to 20 years in prison, while her father was sentenced to 25 years in prison. As the verdict was read, Molly turned to her mother, expressing remorse. "Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation?" The case of Jamie Hahn. Jamie Hahn was born on October 25, 1983, in Orangeburg, South Carolina. She was a compassionate person who always put the needs of others first. She was known for her kindness and her ability to make people happy. Despite her parents' divorce and remarriage, but she grew up with her 2 brothers, Brett and Justin, and sister Ashley, and she maintaining a cheerful outlook. Jamie attended an elite private prep school known for its academic excellence. Her friends and family saw her as a talented and enthusiastic person with a promising future in politics. During a school trip to the University of North Carolina in junior high, Jamie became enamored with the campus and aspired to attend the institution. As she grew older, she joined the board of the Center of Hope, which supported troubled teenagers. She also became involved in various political campaigns, including Senator John Edwards' 2008 presidential campaign. Jamie emerged as a prominent figure within the North Carolina Democratic Party. During this campaign, she met Nation, and the two developed a strong relationship. Over time, their relationship evolved from a platonic connection to a loved one. After just 4 months of dating, the couple got engaged and eventually married on April 18, 2009. Both Jamie and Nation were successful in their careers, with Jamie running her own consulting firm, focused on political fundraising, and Nation working as a well-known online strategist for politicians and nonprofits. People who knew them described them as exceptionally kind, tender, and generous. They have been actively involved in a project protecting young families in North Carolina. Although they didn't have children yet, they plan to start a family soon. Jonathan Broyhill, 31 years old, a close friend of Nation who had been staying in the couple's home as a guest. Jamie was also familiar with Jonathan, having hired him as an accountant at her political consulting firm after he moved to North Carolina. Nation and Jamie kindly him a place to stay in their home until he could find his own accommodation. Jonathan and Nation were from the same hometown, and their friendship began in 2000 during a church trip. Although they had a 4-year age difference, they quickly formed a close bond. Like many childhood friendships, they lost touch when one of them went to college, but reconnected after graduation and became very close. In fact, Jonathan was the best man at Nation and Jamie's wedding in April 2009. The trio of Jonathan, Jamie, and Nation was incredibly close-knit. This strong bond was built on unity, with the three sharing countless moments together. They go on vacation together, have dinner together every Monday, and enjoy holidays together. However, this was a difficult time for Jonathan, who had recently been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Jamie and Nation were deeply concerned about Jonathan's well-being and had been supporting him throughout his medical journey. Jamie was overcome with emotion one day and asked Nation if they should have a child soon. They wanted their future child to have the chance to know their dear friend Jonathan. The reason behind this sudden desire was Jonathan's recent cancer diagnosis. However, Jonathan's health struggles weren't new. Over the years, he had been in and out of hospitals multiple times. At one point, he had been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis during a gallbladder operation. Given his fragile health, Jamie and Nation invited Jonathan to live with them temporarily. They offered him care and support until he could recover. Jonathan spent so much time at Nation family home that some of their neighbors thought of him as a part of the family. Their deep and close relationship makes the violent incident in which all three were stabbed in their own home all the more puzzling and tragic. On a fateful Monday, Jonathan was already at the house, discussing work-related matters with Jamie in the kitchen. Nation had just arrived home and was heading upstairs to change when they were startled by Jamie's screams. Assuming the worst due to Jonathan's health issues, Nation rushed downstairs, where they met Jamie's frantic voice, crying out for help. A frantic scene unfolded as Nation rushed into the kitchen, where he found his wife severely injured and bleeding on the floor, while Jonathan stood over her, menacingly wielding a large kitchen knife. The sight was too shocking for Nation to comprehend. Jonathan, with the knife raised, advanced toward Nation. Then, Nation with one hand, Nation grabbed the knife's blade and, with the other, struck Jonathan in the face. At the same time, Nation urgently told Jamie to run for safety as he tried to subdue Jonathan. She managed to get up from the floor despite her serious injuries and ran through the side door to find help. Once Jamie was out of the house, Nation overcame his shock, pushed Jonathan aside, and followed his wife. Outside, Jamie struggled to reach the nearest neighbor's house but found no one home despite her knocking. While trying to reach the next house, exhausted and weakened by her injuries, Jamie collapsed unconscious in the neighbor's yard. Fortunately, passers-by heard the commotion and came to her aid, and a neighbor who was alerted by Jamie's screams called for an ambulance and the police. Nation frantically searched for Jamie after realizing she was gone. Following a bloody trail, he found her in a neighbor's yard, clutching her side in agony but still conscious. Kneeling beside her, Nation held her hand and tried to reassure her, making promises about their future together, including children, vacations, and future anniversaries. Overwhelmed by the thought of losing her, Nation fought back tears as he spoke. As they waited for help to arrive, a neighbor rushed over with a towel to apply pressure to Jamie's bleeding abdomen. The towel quickly became soaked in blood. Another neighbor tried to make Jamie more comfortable by propping her legs up on a bag of leaves. The wait for an ambulance felt like an eternity to the onlookers. As minutes passed, Jamie's breathing became labored, a clear sign of her critical condition. The ambulance team arrived and immediately performed first aid to save Jamie's life. Nation, who had suffered serious cuts on his hand during the struggle, also needed immediate medical attention. Both Nation and Jamie were rushed to the hospital. Upon arrival, she was immediately wheeled in for emergency surgery. Nation stitched up his own wound, but his mind was preoccupied with fear for his wife's condition. In shock, he tried multiple times to visit her in the ICU but was denied access. Sitting on a hospital bed, he anxiously waiting for information on Jamie's condition. He also was aware of the severity of her injuries, numerous stab wounds, a severed artery, and extensive liver damage. All he could do was hope and pray that she would pull through. Against all odds, Jamie survived the surgery, but unfortunately, this brief moment of hope was short-lived. She never regained consciousness and passed away 2 days later. She succumbing to the injuries she sustained. The autopsy revealed that Jamie had suffered 24 stab wounds on various parts of her body, including her face, neck, back, hands, and forearms. The most severe injuries were inflicted on her abdomen and chest, which caused significant damage to her lungs and liver. After inflicting injuries on himself, Jonathan spent 8 days in the hospital recovering. On April 30, 2013, while still recovering and wearing bandages on both wrists, he was transported on a stretcher to a Wake County magistrate's office. There, he was officially charged with first-degree murder in Jamie's case and assault with a deadly weapon against another individual, Nation. Due to the severity of the charges, he was held without bail. Then taken to Central Prison in Raleigh, which had a hospital wing where he could continue receiving medical treatment while in custody. The sudden and tragic loss of Jamie left many people deeply affected and wondering why someone she considered a best friend would commit such a horrific act, robbing her of her future. After her death, rumors spread that a large amount of money had gone missing from the election campaign managed by Jamie's team. Jonathan, who had been the team's accountant, stopped working for the company at the end of 2012, but continued to provide financial information to Jamie and help with financial reports. Some people suspected that Jamie had discovered the missing funds, which totaled over $50,000, and confronted Jonathan about this. This confrontation might have triggered his violent outburst. On the day of the incident, April 22, 2013, Jamie had invited Jonathan to their usual Monday dinner to discuss the company's financial issues. Many believe that Jamie might have questioned Jonathan about the missing funds at that time. 6 months after the tragic incident, Jamie's husband, Nation, and her family scattered her ashes near the Pulaski Memorial Baptist Church. This church was a place Jamie had voluntarily dedicated a lot of time and effort to. A week before the tragedy. The irony is that Jamie had asked the church's pastor to pray for Jonathan, who was believed to be battling cancer. Little did Jamie know that their lives would soon be shattered. Nation had to come to terms with the fact that someone he had known since childhood had taken the life of the woman he loved. For Nation, Jamie was everything, his partner, his confidant. After Jamie's passing, the trial of Jonathan Broyhill began on March 4, 2015. The district attorney told the jury that Jonathan, Jamie's financial manager, had misappropriated around $50,000 from her account by writing 39 checks to himself. Jonathan made various excuses to justify his actions, including health problems from multiple sclerosis, memory issues, a gallbladder operation, and pancreatic cancer. According to Nation, Jamie knew about the missing money but chose not to confront Jonathan about it because his health is not good. Instead, she hopes Jonathan will admit his mistake and correct it on his own. However, everything changed when Jamie got a call from a debt collector. The district attorney revealed a shocking truth. A year prior, Jonathan's first hospitalization was a result of an incident at the Jamie residence. Prior to this, Jonathan had never medical treatment, which was confirmed by his health records. He had been deceiving Jamie and Nation about his health, falsely claiming to have had a gallbladder operation, multiple sclerosis, and cancer. In reality, his medical history only showed a mental disorder. Jonathan's internet search history showed he had researched pancreatic cancer and specialists in that field, possibly to make his fabrication more believable. He had also looked up cruises that did not require a passport. Furthermore, Jonathan had booked a one-way trip to Las Vegas for April 23, but canceled it on the 22nd, just 2 hours before attacking Jamie with a knife. Jonathan confessed to the authorities that he had misused campaign funds and fabricated his medical conditions. Although Jonathan said he needed medical attention, but he would secretly leave while Nation waited in the car. Nation did not know that he was deceiving them about his true intentions. Around this time, Jonathan was struggling with depression and suicidal thoughts. He was also experiencing auditory hallucinations, hearing voices that encouraged him to harm others. He had even purchased a knife with the intention of using it to end his life in Vegas. However, when Jamie confronted him about the financial irregularities, Jonathan's emotional state escalated, and he began inflicting injuries on himself. As the situation spiraled out of control, Jamie tried to intervene, but Jonathan's anger and delirium led him to attack her impulsively. He remembered attacking Jamie but had no recollection of chasing Nation. Jonathan's lawyer acknowledged that the evidence against him was overwhelming, making it impossible to dismiss the charges. Instead, they planned to argue for temporary insanity to reduce the sentence. On March 19, 2015, the jury delivered their verdict, finding Jonathan Broyhill guilty of murdering Jamie Hahn and attempting to murder Nation Hahn, both first-degree charges. The judge sentenced Jonathan to life in prison without the possibility of parole.